Assalamu alaikum. Good morning and welcome to Knowledge Circle, an initiative by the National Library and Archives in collaboration with the Emirates Literature Foundation, a series of programs that opens the discourse to cultural narratives in the light of archival systems, be it shaping the Arab world, soft power, Emirati literature, sustainability, and more. I would like to thank you for your presence today. We have a great few hours ahead of us with esteemed and accomplished speakers. To commence our first Knowledge Circle event, I would like to call upon His Excellency Abdullah Mاجد Al-Ali to share with us some keynotes. Thank you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرنا ويسعدنا حضوركم الكريم في رحاب الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية لننطلق بالتعاون مع مؤسسة الإمارات للآداب برنامج مساحة معرفة، عاملين أن يكون بوابة ثقافية نحو الاقتصاد المعرفي. السادة الحضور، إن هذا البرنامج الثقافي الذي يستمر 7 أشهر تشهد تنظيم 7 ندوات متخصصة فيها أكثر من 20 جلسة يشارك فيها نخبة من الخبراء والمختصين، سوف يسلطون الضوء على جوانب مهمة في ماضي الإمارات وحاضرها وفي علوم الأرشيف، وهو من ثمار المشاركة التي وقع عليها الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية مع مؤسسة الإمارات للآداب. وقد اختيرت الندوات وفق استراتيجية متطورة ذات صلة متينة بالمنظومة الثقافية الوطنية، التي تثري سجل ذاكرة الوطن بمزيد من الازدهار الثقافي. الإخوة والأخوات، اليوم يفتتح الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية بالتعاون مع مؤسسة الإمارات للآداب برنامج مساحة معرفة بملتقاه الأول عبر عدسة الأرشيف، ليسلط الضوء على دور أنظمة الأرشيف في الحفاظ على ذاكرة الأمة وخلق وعي مشترك في إطار الاهتمام بالوثائقي باعتبارها المصدر الأساسي للمعلومات الدقيقة التي تسهم في نشر المعرفة وترتقي بالإنسان والمجتمع. وبدور المؤسسات التي وضعت البنية التحتية لدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة وجهودها في توثيق تاريخ الدولة وتقدمها. يعد ملتقى اليوم وما سيتبعه من ندوات نافذة معرفية على تاريخ الإمارات المجيد وحاضرها الزاهر، وعلى التنمية المستدامة التي لا تتوقف في ظل توجيهات قيادتها الرشيدة. وقد طالت هذه التنمية المشهد الثقافي الذي جعل من دولة الإمارات مركز إشعاع ثقافي. الحضور الكريم، اسمحوا لي ونحن نحتفي بإطلاق برنامج مساحة معرفة بأن أدعوكم إلى المشاركة في الحدث الأرشيفي الأكبر المتمثل بكونغرس المجلس الدولي للأرشيف التي تستضيفه العاصمة أبو ظبي تحت شعار إثراء مجتمعات المعرفة من الفترة بين 9 و 13 أكتوبر المقبل، والذي يعنى بالقضايا التي تخص الإرث الإنساني وتجميعه وحفظه وإتاحته. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Hosniya Muhammad Al-Ali, Education Consultant at National Library and Archives, to come up on stage for a few words. Thank you very much.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سعيدة بوجودكم وإطلاق مشروعنا المشترك، مشروع الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية مع مؤسسة الإمارات للآداب. كان هذا المشروع حلم في بداية الموضوع، وسعينا جاهدين أن نحقق هذا المشروع ونستفيد من الخبرات الموجودة في مجال التوثيق والأدب والمعارف المتنوعة، حتى إن شاء الله نساهم معا في بناء اقتصاد معرفي مستدام، وذلك مع احتفاليات دولة الإمارات بعام الاستدامة. مشروع مساحة معرفة هو مشروع راح يستمر على مدار 7 أشهر ويقدم جلسات متنوعة. جلستنا اليوم اللي راح تتناول موضوعنا في عبر عدسة الأرشيف محاور عدة و3 جلسات رئيسية. الجلسة الأولى بعنوان الخليج معبر للحضارات، والجلسة الثانية بناء الأمة، والجلسة الأخيرة إرث الماضي ثروة معرفية. هذه الجلسات شارك فيها نخبة من المتحدثين من السادة الأفاضل من الإمارات وخارج الإمارات، وأيضا بيكون لنا متحدثين إن شاء الله عن بعد من خلال التواصل الافتراضي معهم للمداخلة في هذه الجلسة. مشاركتكم كجمهور مهم بالنسبة لنا، مش مهمة بالنسبة لنا، والفيدباك اللي تعطونا يا راح إن شاء الله يثري الندوات القادمة. أخيرا بس أحب أنوه لكم جميعا بأن ما يرد من مناقشات ومحاور لا يعكس بالضرورة رأي الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية، وإنما هي آراء للمتحدثين الأفاضل الذين نفتح لهم الأفق عبر برنامج مساحة معرفة، فرص وأفق التواصل والمعرفة والحوار. أهلا بكم في الأرشيف المكتبة الوطنية، وأتمنى لكم يوم سعيد وموفق.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the speakers for our first session today. For the Gulf Crossroads, Professor William Zimmerle, Professor Timothy Power, Professor Peter McGee, and Alia Al-Shamsi. Please, thank you very much.
So good morning. Welcome to our Knowledge Circle. And I'm honored to be here today with our esteemed colleagues and friends. And we've had a nice discussion prior to this circle, but also this morning about the various disciplines and projects that we all have. And today we'd like to invite you into this circle to have a conversation with all of us. All of us are working in one way or another on a project or two projects that involve the United Arab Emirates. All of these projects are at the crossroads of the history and heritage of the country. And all of the projects, I think, are cultivating and curating new data for understanding the past, whether it's in antiquity or in the medieval ages, Islam, early, middle, and late Islamic periods, or for the present day. So today we'd like to invite you into that to see some of the work that we're doing, and then also see how we're having discussions together that are interdisciplinary. We come from all different disciplines and walks of life, but our common meeting place is the United Arab Emirates. So we'll begin with the first question for our panelists today. What are you doing? How did you get involved in the United Arab Emirates? How did you get here with your project, multiple projects? Some of you have been working for over 20 years here in the country, and what do you hope for the future for the UAE as you engage with this project that you're doing? And Peter, we'll begin with you, and we'll put up a wonderful image that you see behind you.
Nice, nice. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, to have the opportunity to talk to you this morning. Your Excellency Abdullah Majid, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. We very much appreciate all the work that the National Archives are doing for Zayed National Museum. So my journey to be working now on this amazing project started on the 20th of December, 1992. I know the exact date because I found my old passport a little while ago. And in that passport is the stamp when I first entered the United Arab Emirates. So it was 31 years ago. I came here as a young student, starting my PhD. I had the opportunity to work in a few different regions. And when I first came here in December 1992, I thought this is the region about which I want to learn more. I want to learn more about the history and the archaeology of the place. And I was also struck at that time by the fact that there was a true public interest and support for exploring history and exploring archaeology and exploring culture. And that public support was matched by governmental support, which I think is incredibly important to facilitate research. So that was a while ago, 31 years ago. I began my research at a number of archaeological sites, mostly in the north of the country, looking at issues of how this region was engaged in trade and exchange with its neighbors across the region. And the image on the screen now speaks to that very eloquently. A number of sites, a site called Tel Abrak, which is in Sharjah and Quwain, and a site called Muwayla, which I excavated for 15 years in the north of the country. And although archaeology is about objects, it seems, archaeology is ultimately about stories. And the stories that objects tell us illuminate the past, but they also illuminate contemporary and modern day culture. So for example, this object here, this is a camel figurine, which we found that dates to about 3,000 years ago. It is the earliest representation of a securely domesticated camel anywhere in the world. And it speaks to the importance of that animal in local culture. So objects are about stories, and that leads me very easily into my contemporary role, which is in Zayed National Museum as director of Zayed National Museum, where in that museum, we will use objects, film, audio to explore the life and achievements of Sheikh Zayed in unifying this country, his values, but we also interweave that story of the person and his remarkable achievements into the history and culture and archaeology of the country. So for me, I remain 31 years after entering this country, honored and humbled at the opportunity to do what I do here. That's my story.
Thank you. And Peter, during the summer, we had the opportunity to bring you to NYU Abu Dhabi to speak to one of my seminars on archaeology. And one of the things that just came out from the discussion was really the natural evolution of your career, having worked here for so long and so hard. The natural evolution of the career was to become the director of the Zayed National Museum. So
that's a nice thing to say. It was never something that I assumed, but in some ways it does mark a very humbling pinnacle to my career here. Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
And Alia is a cultural manager at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and she's responsible. This is another museum right on Saudi Island, right next door to the National Museum that's being built. And the Louvre Abu Dhabi has had a strong presence on the island for quite a long time now. And we had the opportunity to meet a few years ago. We did a perfume session at the Louvre Abu Dhabi together, and that was a lovely event. And talk to us about some of the things you do at the Louvre, but also some of the projects that you're involved with yourself in the process of creating. And I know we have the opportunity to talk about this before, is that, you know, many of us on the platform are archaeologists, and you're not an archaeologist, but you are doing some fantastic work, right, on storytelling and preserving the history and heritage of the UAE. Tell us about that.
So yes, I'm not an archaeologist, but I believe that every one of us Emiratis is a storyteller. We're born with this idea of telling stories. So I've inherited stories from my parents and also my grandparents. And within these stories lies this intangible, object, which also illustrates history. So perhaps I'll expand on that on another moment, but it sort of burrows in very nicely with everything that we have at Louvre Abu Dhabi. They're just objects. So unless we create a story behind they just remain that. And you can see how objects gain and lose different meanings throughout the years. And I think with putting them within a bigger context of the UAE culture, UAE history. And we've seen this expansion with a couple of recent findings, with the al-Qiwain monastery and the different monastery. With the exhibition currently we have also a show that shows the diverse religions that are here in the UAE. So all of these are different stories with objects, but also I believe that the intangible history is able to enrich in it even further. So that's where it comes to what I do as an author. I recently had, the pleasure of working with the UAE Board on Books, where we re-looked at the folklore stories. Just to let you know a little bit about that, it was beautiful because as growing up, my father would read to me Waq Waq Island, which in itself was just a story to me. And I was just rewriting it for a more contemporary audience, which is the outcome was a book with a group of 10 Emirati authors that re-looked at these stories. So Waq Waq Island is quite interesting because it's actually mentioned in other books as well. So it struck an interest to me to try and understand where is it located. When I told my dad that, obviously he's like, you're a bit too old to believe in folklore and fairy tales, but it just intrigued me. Where is this? So it was mentioned in 1001 Nights, Sindibad, and that's where you sort of start understanding and unpacking the story itself. You have a mention of Sultan, where, there are very specific places where you have a Sultan. I'm not sure if everybody knows the story here, but very, very briefly, it's a story about a sultan's favorite garden that is a group of women with feathered robes come and destroy, and finally they're trying to find a solution to capture them and to stop this vandalism in a nutshell. But I won't ruin the story. But again, there are certain things in the story that you're able to unpack. For example, Sultan. For example, gardens. There were pomegranates. Where do pomegranates come from? So things like that, you start understanding that perhaps the story is not really from this region, or is it from this region? There are versions that are coastal and versions that are inward. So you start to create, it starts meaning much more than just the story. It starts indicating where it originates from and sort of tracing it across the world. So I've traced it, similar stories in different countries, and the question starts arising is, why do we have these common stories? Where do they really originate and come from?
And that's a great question. We've often talked about the region as a place where so many things come from here, or they have passed through here. This then therefore is indeed the crossroads on the way to the Middle East, the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian Ocean, East Africa. Tim, talk to us about this. Tim is a associate professor in archaeology at the United Arab Emirates University in Al Ain. And Tim has been doing extraordinary work on the topic of Christianity in the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, well, what you're looking at here is the monastery church of Sania in the island, the Emirate of Qawain. And I was asked to get involved with this a few years ago by the Ministry of Culture and Youth. Luxury real estate development on the island had prompted a campaign of archaeological prospection. And the local department had unearthed a building. And they were really hoping that they were going to find a mosque or a fort established with the earliest foundation of the Al-Ali in the Emirate of Qawain, which is reputed to have been on the island of Sania. So they were digging and they kind of found these walls and these sort of building plan, and it didn't look like a fort. It didn't look like a mosque either. And so they weren't quite sure what was going on. And they asked the Ministry of Culture and Youth for help and support. And they in turn asked me, and I had a look at these photographs of this sort of half excavated building, and I thought, good gracious, this is a church. And you could see immediately from the architectural plan that it had very strong parallels with another church that was found in Kuwait back in the 1990s at a site called El Qusur. So I got very excited about this, and I went up to see Sheikh Mاجد, the head of the Department of Archaeology and Tourism in Qawain, and he invited me to set up a project, which I did a couple of years ago, and the project's really grown, and we've continued our excavations here, and we've brought in famous historians to help situate this in the world of late antiquity. And we're really excited about this because having just discovered the church and monastery, we kind of kept looking in the wider landscape, and we found about half a kilometer to the south of this a town, and actually really quite an impressive urbanized settlement with stone buildings, the very large courtyard buildings, probably of merchants or the kind of elite of the society, and many, many more smaller stone houses from the kind of the common people, the fishermen who lived in and around. And essentially, as we kind of worked more on this settlement, we realized we were actually dealing with perhaps the first tangible evidence for a historic pearling town in the Arabian Gulf. As such, this town is in some sense the spiritual ancestor of pearling towns such as Dubai or Muharraq or Kuwait. I mean, all of these characteristic stone towns of the urban landscape of the Gulf region. And actually, the earliest sort of extant example of this was discovered just here next to this monastery in Qawain. So this project sort of snowballed, and we got extremely excited about it because we had the church, we had the monastery, and also we have arguably the oldest pearling town in the Gulf region. So tremendously exciting, and you're all very welcome to come and have a look as you wish.
Great, thank you. And this is sort of rewriting history in the region, I would say, as we're finding new data Talk to us about this as well. Your curriculum development and education development has been going on for quite a long time in the UAE, first at Zayed University and now at UAE University. And I think all of us are in some ways engaged with educating young people and people of all ages in the United Arab Emirates and beyond about the heritage of the Arabian Peninsula and this country. So what's going on here?
Well, I mean, I began my career in the Emirates as an archaeological consultant, was brought in to run excavations in the oases of Al Ain. And I really loved that, actually. I mean, the oasis landscape is absolutely phenomenal. And I really kind of started to feel an attachment to this this landscape of these crumbling mud brick buildings and these sort of gorgeous kind of palm fringed horizons. I mean, it was really a kind of intoxicating landscape. And you know, increasingly I was kind of brought in to train young Emirati archaeologists. And, you know, that gave me a connection to the people. And I remember, you know, about a year after I started working in the Emirates, I was talking to one of them about, I asked him, you know, what's your tribe famous for? And he said, fighting and poetry. And I thought this was a wonderful evocation of Hasab and Nasab. And really, I thought, well, this is a place I can live. You know? So over the past 15 years, I've sort of developed a sort of deepening attachment to the landscape and to the people, which is why I'm still here, essentially. But it kind of began here with the oases of Al Ain. My kind of role as a consultant developed and grew, and I got more and more into training, and that ultimately led to a teaching position at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. And when I was there, we set up an archaeological field school. And this was really the first time anything like this had been attempted in the Emirates. And it wasn't actually supported or encouraged by the administration. Really, it was because of Sheikh Osha and Sheikh Aliazia bin Nahyan. We were able to set up this project. We brought the students from Al Ain to work, students from Abu Dhabi to work in Al Ain. Beginning in 2014, it went on for several years. Every year we'd bring them for a month to work inside the oasis. And actually it was a fantastic experience because it's deeply rewarding to get young people switched on to archaeology and to understand their past. I think you know, we all have, when we're growing up, these kind of experiences that allow us to develop our enthusiasms or passions for a particular subject. And I think that being able to kind of create those opportunities was deeply rewarding. And I think one of the sort of, I suppose, if you want a sort of less romantic and more tangible justification for this program was that many of the students who graduated from it went on to work for cultural institutions, heritage institutions here in the Emirates. So many now work with Peter at the Zayed National Museum, others work at the DCT, others work in the Louvre. They've all done fantastically well, I think, because they're self-motivated, because they're passionate about what they do. And these kind of experiences, I think, played a large role in allowing them to develop those passions and enthusiasms which have carried their careers forward.
Perfect. And our students then are getting hands-on training. And then going out into the field. So this is a wonderful opportunity for them. My own arrival as well in the United Arab Emirates came in 2018, but it preceded that by arriving in the Gulf in 2011. I was finishing a dissertation at the University of Pennsylvania and first struggling to find a topic, and I found in the museum there small incense burners, what we call cuboid incense burners, and that changed my life. I found a good number, sizable number of them from particular sites, all from every quadrant of the Middle East, and then began to go from museum to museum, building up a catalog of these forms that were predominantly pre-Islamic, particularly peaking at about the 6th century BC at the rise of the aromatics trade. Not long before finishing my doctorate, I had won an award to go to Oman, the Sultanate, and that award allowed me enough funding to do a year's worth, the beginning of our season of an ethnographic project of incense burner manufacturing and production And we began to work with potters in Dhofar, who still made a traditional form, much like in similar shape to the ones that we found in the archaeological record. And in that process, I found myself evolving as well, from being an archaeologist to becoming an ethnographer. And I think that's, you could see the array of different disciplines and stories we all have, that all of us are heritage keepers in one way or another, preserving these stories of people from the Arabian Peninsula. And we began to actually document this with hundreds of hours of videos and hundreds of hours of videos of cultivation of frankincense or luban, which comes from the Arabic word whiteness, which has to do with often the color, the descriptiveness of the crystallization of the trees. We made an exhibition out of it, and we displayed this in the Sultan Qaboos Center in Washington, D.C. But in 2018, I saw something even bigger than that project, and we brought what you see here is a chromogram of some of the lab equipment we have at the university, and we began a project of building up a heritage incense, Arabian incense, perfumes, and fine fragrance laboratory, a library of chemical analysis. And this is just a snapshot of what we can do in that library, because we've been testing different types of bahor and fine fragrances and also duhuns, for example. And you can see here on the top the chromogram of a duhun from Sharjah. A woman makes wonderful duhuns there. And you can see all the peaks that are there representing the complexity of that fine perfume. We can ask then the question, what is luxury? Right? Well, we can see it chemically right before our eyes in the library that we have. And it's full of smell, as my one colleague says, smelly compounds, all things that would be used in perfumes. Coumarin, for example, is vanilla-like, and it's used in many perfumes. And we have benzoic acid, for example, as well, which is coming from gum resins. And so we can begin to tell the story this way of perfume making that goes back centuries earlier, but we can tell it as well right before our eyes as a heritage in the UAE. We're building up this library that you see. This brings me to our next set of questions, and that is on archives themselves. In 2008, there was a federal law here in the United Arab Emirates to create documentation and centers of documentation. This was followed up in 2014 and in 2022, and then thus we have the National Archives and National Library and Archives before our very eyes, and we're privileged to be here. Archiving is an important part of the work we do. So this next question is, what role do the archives have in your projects? How is that helping you to rewrite, let's say, the history of the UAE at the crossroads, whether it's in antiquity, in the medieval ages, or the modern day? Peter, we'll begin with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, as I said in the introduction, we're very lucky to work with the National Archives. So in telling the story of the UAE and telling the story of Sheikh Zayed, the archives which are kept here are critical to telling those stories. We are still discovering fascinating stories, imagery, historical accounts, all of which illuminate the history of the country going back several hundred years, as well as those which focus more on Sheikh Zayed's life. We also work with archivists around the world to explore what exists from a perception of how the country was written about and perceived from the outside. So this is something which is contained within archives, for example, in Lisbon, in Portugal, it's as well as within the National Archives here. The Dutch archives, we've just recently conducted an archive project in Hull in the UK, where they have the diary of a British officer stationed in Ras Al Khaimah in 1820, and his notes about his life there. Fascinating reading. Someone who is simultaneously carrying with him all of the pronounced sort of Orientalist colonial tropes, which one would expect of a British officer being stationed in Ras Al Khaimah in 1820, while at the same time conflicted by his role. So I love the opportunity that archives present to look at one person and through the lens of that one person, without being judgmental as to their role, we can see the conflict, the multitude of voices which someone can have about what they're observing around them. And I think that is, for archive work, is endlessly fascinating for what we're trying to do at Zayed National Museum. There is one other thing which as well as those personal stories, there's a wonderful story which we saw in the archives in Lisbon. It is a Portuguese sailor sailing along the east coast of the United Arab Emirates, and he writes in his diary, and he says that the people here, they drink something called gawa, or they call it bun. And he says, it clears the head and it banishes sleep. And this, as a description of a Portuguese person writing about gawa, of course, coffee has not made an impact yet in Western Europe. Coffee probably through Venice to the northern part of Europe and then into Portugal a little bit later. But just to capture in that moment, of course, now coffee, gawa is associated as a global product, but to capture that moment in the 1640s of someone describing a drink, which is of course now the national drink of the United Arab Emirates, was then as well in the 17th century, but to be surprised and to describe it in those terms, it clears the mind and it banishes sleep. I think that's beautiful. And so for me, that's the sort of stuff where archives are critical in the development.
The sweetness of the art.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Ali, I know you're involved in archives, but also publishing and creating and disseminating to the community out of education reasons, but just I think the enjoyment of it as well, right? Can you talk more
Absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, so I think there are two things with the archives and also the role of education. So I think we have so much material. And the idea is now how to make that relevant to the general public. So it's whether, we're looking at, creating programs where we're, having a dialogue as we are right now, or creating historical film documentaries and such. But I think what's really important is how to integrate it into our curriculum. I really believe there is so much need of making it relevant, all these stories, all these things that we're discussing here today within the curriculum, because we're talking amongst each other. We're pretty much in the same field, but this is part of the heritage and the history of not just the Emiratis, but of the world, because we also play in, a bigger role of the crossroads, as we were talking about. So I do believe the thing is now, how do we take all this content and, make it go into the curriculum as something that's taught?
I know, Peter, you've been involved in the national curriculum and supporting archaeology, and Tim and I at the university level been teaching courses on the archaeology of the United Arab Emirates, and I think all of this is important, and telling the story in different ways as well. Tim, not just on the side of education, that's one question for you, but also the question of just, we know the amount of data that's generated from an archaeological excavation is enormous these days. How do you keep track of it? How do you store it? How do you disseminate the story of these artifacts that you find to the public? What are you doing that allows you to get that knowledge out to the community?
Well, I think just sort of taking a step back, I mean, the project that we're doing up in Gawain deals with a historic period. In other words, we have historical sources which help us understand and interpret the archaeological record. And my colleague, the historian Robert Hoyland from New York University in America, uses this amazing archive, this fantastic database resource, the Maktabah Shamiliyah, which is essentially a transcription, a digitization of just about every Arabic history and geography ever written from the pre-modern period. And he can just enter a search item into that, and all of these sources pop up. So one of the research issues we're kind of trying to address right now is, the identification of this historic pearling town that we have discovered next to the monastery. And I think actually we can make an argument that this town should be, these archaeologically attested towns should be identified with a historically known settlement on the Gulf Coast called Tu'am. Now, there has been a misidentification of this place with Al Ain, largely thanks to the work of a 19th century Omani historian. But actually, when you go back to the source material, it makes it very clear that it's on the coast, that we have Magas al-Lu'lu, that we have al-Bahr Yasamma Tu'amman, the sea, which is known as the Tuamian Sea. All of this stuff is really exciting. And the fact that Robert can use this incredible archive, this database, to call up not just one or two sources, but hundreds, which make the sort of velocity of information quite phenomenal, actually. And I think, with that volume of evidence, there's very little room to kind of move away from the interpretation. And it seems quite clear now that this is historic Tu'am. But I think what's fascinating as well in terms of archives is that we can take a step back actually into history. And two of the main sources that we're dealing with. The first is Yakut Rumi al-Hamawi, who was a Greek from Asia Minor, captured on the kind of the border with the Dar al-Islam, enslaved. He worked for a merchant of Hamma in Bilad al-Sham, and he was sent as a merchant's representative to the Arabian Gulf several times. Eventually, he bought his freedom, and he went on to become one of the most famous geographers in the classical Islamic period. He wrote his great geographical treatise using the libraries of Merv in Central Asia, which was then the capital of the Seljuk Empire. And on the kind of the other side, another major source that we're using is al-Bakri. Now, al-Bakri was a Spanish muwallad. He was European who was a Mawla of the Bakr bin Wa'il tribe of northeast Arabia, who'd settled in Al-Andalus after the conquest of Futuh al-Buldan. And he was using the libraries of Cordoba in Al-Andalus, this vast library. I mean, the index for the library of Cordoba under the Second Umayyad Caliphate ran to 18 volumes alone. It was one of the most astonishing libraries, the largest library in Europe in that period. So al-Bakri had at his disposal this vast library, this vast assemblage of knowledge, which he pulled together. Now, I think it's quite wonderful. I mean, the subject of this talk was the kind of Arab crossroads. I mean, here you have two sources based on archives, libraries in the classical Islamic period, one in the very far west of the Dar al-Islam and one in the very far east. And both of them are providing information about the historical geography of the United Arab Emirates in the pre-modern period. So I think, to understand this archaeological site, we have actually two layers of archiving. We have the historic archives used by the Arab geographers over 1,000 years ago. And at the same time, we have the modern computerized databases, which allow us to tap into unprecedented volumes of knowledge very quickly. So I think archives play a really important role in the interpretation of archaeological sites in the historic period.
What about the role? What about digitizing your archives? This is for some of our other panelists. What initiatives are taking place as we move from a much more a traditional way of doing archives to preserving them digitally, right? Because of the big data that we may have.
In terms of archaeology, I mean, that was a process which started some time ago. I mean, I think most excavations now, they feel that there is an ethical and professional responsibility to archive everything properly. So the excavations that we did in the north of the United Arab Emirates in Tel Abrak and Muwayla, that's a digital archive, and archiving it is one aspect of it. But the most important thing is making that available to people. So as we finish that project, then the data becomes available for anyone that wants to study it. It tends to be quite technical data, but often students might want to look at it, for example, for theses or PhDs or whatever. But there is no point in gathering all of this information unless it's accessible to the people that are interested in it. And as Tim would know, on the average excavation, sometimes people have a conception that on an archaeological site you might find one or two objects. You find thousands and thousands of objects, and you cannot possibly conceptualize keeping all of them. You need to in your head. You need to have a system of recording them. And yeah, we're very happy with the work that we've achieved in that regard, only because it provides public access. That's the key issue. Yeah.
The public access is key.
Yep. Yep.
We'll move now into our final section before we ask you for some questions and answers, and questions from you and hopefully answers from us. This final section, I would like to address the legacy of Sheikh Zayed in the work that we all are doing in the National Library and Archives here. And Tim, I begin with a quote from you that's in the press. Quote, "The Emirates, and indeed Arabia in general, isn't as visible in the great world museums of London, Paris, Berlin, or New York, because it wasn't part of the colonial venture of archaeology." What do you mean by
that? Yeah, I think basically what's happened is this sort of colonial period in Europe from the 18th through to the 20th century created a canon of the ancient civilizations of the world. It was actually a contested canon. The British and French, for example, fought over who would possess the past. When Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, he marched down the Nile with his savants who created the Description de l'Égypte, which, talking about archiving, is one of the most fantastic works of documentation ever produced. But you know, those kind of antiquarians collected all sorts of statues and reliefs from Egypt, which were, you know, intended to be shipped back and displayed in the Louvre. But the British, having defeated Napoleon at the Battle of the Nile, or Battle of Abu Ir, basically captured all of the French loot and brought it back to the British Museum. And so, you know, this sort of fighting over who gets to control the past, who gets to control the narrative, effectively, the deep roots of civilization, has created a rather distorted understanding of the deep history, the deep you know, past of the Middle East region. Arabia was never really part of that. It was never directly colonized. The British here in the Emirates had a pretty small presence, in fact, right up until the 1950s when it began to grow a little bit. And they never really got involved with archaeology. Arabia was sort of assumed to be empty. So what that has meant is that, you know, Arabia doesn't really appear in the museums of Europe. It doesn't appear in the school textbooks. It's not really taught. There isn't much public understanding of Arabian heritage in the wider world. But at the same time, there's a wonderful advantage to this situation, because what it means is that the archaeological work that's now being done in the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia at the moment, tremendous amount of work being done, is that this archaeological work is happening in a moment when archaeology is so much better than it used to be 200 years ago. We have better methodologies, we have better interpretative theories which allow us to appreciate the past. I think what's happening, therefore, is that we're enjoying a kind of golden age of archaeology in the Arabian Peninsula right now. And that with our modern field methods and techniques, with our modern theoretical paradigms, Arabia is increasingly being restored to its rightful position in the Middle East region, really at the very heart of the Fertile Crescent, not as a passive recipient of civilizational developments from the Fertile Crescent, but actually contributing to them. I mean, some of the work that Peter's been doing, for example, about the domestication of the camel, which happens here in Arabia, transformed trade in the Iron Age. You know, fundamentally important stuff. You know, the technological developments are coming out of Arabia. So Arabia is not just this sort of empty space devoid of history and archaeology. It's somewhere that was actively at the heart of the Middle East. And I think what's happening now is we're enjoying this wonderful episode of archaeological exploration in which the true significance of Arabian archaeology is being understood, documented, and appreciated.
Peter, we'll turn our attention to you.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Tim.
We'll take the question.
There's just one thing I'd like to pick up on, which is, you know, so in Zayed National Museum, we explore this issue, but we also, of course, while, as Tim correctly points out, you know, archaeology was a created European colonial enterprise. There's no question about that. But at the same time, there was always an understanding for people that lived here that there was a deep understanding. So archaeology kicked off in the United Arab Emirates from an invitation from Sheikh Shakbut for Danish archaeologists living in Bahrain to come down and to look on the island of Umanar, Sas al-Nakhil, and to look for archaeology there. And of course, that was right. There was a Bronze Age civilization, and there is this wonderful letter, which hopefully you'll all see soon, which is a letter from the Danish archaeologists writing to Sheikh Shakbut saying, we have discovered this Bronze Age civilization in your country. And then, of course, Sheikh Zayed, who absolutely saw the potential of archaeology to develop the national narrative, invited those same archaeologists in March 17th, 1959, to come down to Al Ain, where they began work. And that led eventually, of course, to the great discoveries in Al Ain and the registering of Al Ain as UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2011. There's one final point I would like to say. That knowledge of history, that sense that there was history which people understood, goes all the way back. There is this fabulous description from 1827 by an English explorer, Whitlock, who meets the ruler of Abu Dhabi at the time, Sheikh Tanun. And Sheikh Tanun says to him, please come with me. It's a 7-day journey on camels, but in the inland, there is an ancient city which is full of trees. And this is Al Ain. And so there is this sense as he talks that there's no question that Al Ain was understood as being ancient as well as being an oasis. So all of this knowledge was already embedded one way or another. And it's something that we really have a great joy in exploring in the museum.
Alia, you have our final word today.
So I just wanted to say, I think it's a great way to say that we now need to look into the future. In the future dialogues and the future perspectives. I think it was great that we had these archaeologists coming in and bringing, how they saw the UAE, whether they're from, the Dutch or the English, etc. But I really feel it's quite important now to relook at these archives, to rediscover this from an Emirati perspective. What does it mean to us? How do we interpret this? And how do we give it new meaning? And maybe also to make it our own as well and part of our own history now.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, our dear panelists today. Alia El-Shamsi of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, Peter McGee of the Zayed National Museum, Tim Power of the United Arab Emirates University. I'm William Zimmerly, New York University, Abu Dhabi. Thank you all for these wonderful remarks. And we turn now our attention over to you. We invite you to have discussion with us and ask any questions that are on your mind from our discussion today. Is there a microphone? There we go.
Do I need to stand up or is this okay?
That's fine.
Yeah. Mahnaz Fancy from the Ministry of Culture. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to hear. And I keep thinking about Alia's question about how do we transmit the possibilities, the opening to discover new narratives to new generations. And as somebody who loved being in my university library and discovering magical turns of phrase like the Portuguese discovery of Kahwa. I mean, these are wonderful human moments that are incredibly fun. How can we transmit the sheer pleasure of this detective work, of this storytelling uncovering in a way that makes use of these new technologies and makes a sense out of avoiding ChatGPT rather than the stacks or archives or all these things?
You want to speak?
Yeah, so there are a couple of initiatives that are happening by youth. المورث. صح؟ الموروث, for example, that is a social media platform where an individual took it to himself to go and document stories from the UAE and really going into more of the people. So it's very human interaction. It's and then just, you know, trying to gather all these stories. For example, also in terms of folklore stories, you have Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Musallam, who has been documenting, and these women are no longer with us, but their stories are still being said. I think social media is a fantastic medium. I just came back as well from a conference on South Arabia, and there was a young man with almost zero funding that is collecting stories from Yemen, and he's invited different people to share their stories through let's say social media. I think it's through Facebook, and it went up to 70,000 people that contributed to this. So there are these platforms. I don't think we have to make it academic. I think we could make it quite accessible, quite fun. And I think that's a way, an entry point for people to get interested and then go into the archives and later on. So.
I think we had a question over
Yes,
there.
please. Abdullah Shami, cultural consultant. My question to Alia, we saw a cover of your book, but we didn't know what your book is about. So if you can tell us more about it and where to find it. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a book that is co-authored with a group of 10 Emirati writers. The initiative was with an NGO called UAE Board and Books. So it's how to make reading accessible to the general public youth segment specifically. So through this workshop, we re-looked at the folklore stories and trying to rewrite them in a more contemporary, accessible way for young people today. This was they had all our childhood stories. So I know that this book is in Arabic, but will be available as well. We're looking at expanding it into English because we think that also it could open up more dialogues with other countries. I've been part of also a lot of the book fairs where we do have these things in dialogues, and there the occasions where we found that some stories are the same. So I was in South Korea. I was illustrating this story of the fairy and the woodcutter, which is exactly the waq, but it's the Korean version. It's literally the same story. So again, trade routes, history, contact with the Islamic world. This is just shows you how even stories migrated across the world.
First of all, thank you for an amazing, enlightening talk about all the treasures of the Emirates going back in thousands and thousands of years. I heard a story, I'm not sure if it's true, so I want to ask, that one of the Bedou from the deep desert came to the late Sheikh Zayed many years ago, and he said there was an elephant footprint that was sort of kept in fossilized stone. And if I was a child, this would be the most exciting thing for me to think about an elephant in the United Arab Emirates. What is the truth in this, if any, and where is it? I mean, don't tell me, obviously.
Yes, so it's a true story. And what he was describing was a footprint of a series of animals which existed in the Miocene period, 6 million years ago, called Stetrabelatelodon. I hope I get that right. And it's like it is like a sort of very, very ancient form of elephant, except it has 4 tusks. And in an area in Dhafra, there are indeed the most amazing trackways of a herd of these animals walking across what then would have been a sabka landscape, and their footprints are preserved. And it highlights, the story highlights several things. First of all, is that the person knew that Sheikh Zayed would be interested in this because he's interested in the history and culture of the land. But it also illuminates that just under the desert sand, with Tim, Tim earlier used the phrase that palm-fringed horizon, which I'm going to use that. That was really nice. But just under the desert sand, that there are these histories which stretch back millions of years. In this case, illuminating the fact that the environment was completely different then. There was a very large river running through Dhafra into what would become the Arabian Gulf. So yeah, it's a true story. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Mohammed Kazim, co-founder of Tamashi.
How are you? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. Actually, I've been working also on trying to do what you guys touched upon, which is relevance, storytelling, and using local content. And I've seen its importance in two elements. One is in self-development of the youth. Understanding this history gives them confidence, and understanding that they've come from a deep-rooted and complex history gives them another level of confidence that maybe was missing for a long time from our region. And on top of that, as we're moving to a globalized world, I think differentiating our product offerings and our service offerings using this content is crucial. That brings me to, again, what you guys spoke about, which is curriculum, as well as maybe even touching upon things like tourism. For example, when we bring up situations like there's a 5,000-year-old tomb in Al Sufuh next to Dubai Marina, people get shocked and it's not even highlighted. Similarly with the elephant story. And also when it comes to curriculum, we still don't see this, not even on a level of a master's program in Arabic language. We don't talk about the evolution of Arabic script through ancient Southern Arabian Musnad scripts and Northern Aramaic scripts, and also the fact that they're available like Shamash in the temple in or like the Musnad script found in the tombstone in Sharjah. So again, all these things are so intense. So I just want to know if the ministries of education and the ministries of tourism or the departments responsible for tourism, are they interested in this kind of content? And what is your role, if any, to actually convey this and even support its propagation?
Well, I mean, right now I'm a professor at the United Arab Emirates University in Al Ain, which is the oldest and largest university in the country. The BA History was closed about 2 years ago, and right now we're trying to come up with a new program in history and archaeology. The problem is, of course, that the Ministry of Education and the Prime Minister's Office requires that all undergraduate programs are aligned with the needs of the labour market. And it's actually very difficult to get the market analysis to demonstrate that there are thousands of jobs awaiting graduates in archaeology every year. And of course, there aren't, right? I mean, so as a result, there are no archaeology programs at an undergraduate or a postgraduate level at any state university in the country. And when I was in Saudi Arabia recently, the Saudis were really surprised at this. I mean, they've got 3 generations of archaeologists being taught at their universities, and we just don't have that here. We've hardly got any Emirati archaeologists, and we have no Emirati professors of archaeology, and we've got no Emirati programs teaching archaeology. So really, unless we have the active support and encouragement of Ministry of Education, archaeology and even history is basically going to die in this country. And what that means is that Emiratis will lose the ability to write their own history. Now that is, I mean, honestly, this is a crisis, okay? It's a low-key crisis. It's been going on for some time now. It's a huge problem. So if anybody can help and support, we would love it, actually. But yeah, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, I would add, it's often it's a collective problem to solve. All of us need to be involved. And one of the things we did at NYU Abu Dhabi, for example, is when I arrived, I didn't know of a course that would bring students to all of the different archaeological sites through all the Emirates. And so we established a core curriculum course, which is it's for everyone, not one major, called Arabia Felix, the Imagined Land of Happiness. And Peter's come to the course to speak, the summer version of it. And I designed it first, honestly, for visiting students from New York, thinking that they would be the most attracted to it, and they are. But actually, the most rewarding outcome has been Emirati students taking the course and then saying, I didn't learn any of this when I went through the school system. And I'm so proud of this. I'm so excited about this, generating an interest in archaeology. And then asking the next question, which is just natural. Are there careers? Can I do this for a living? Can I go and work in archaeology or some aspect of the cultural sector? And Tim and I were just at the World Archaeology Congress, and we just saw lots and lots of individuals, young people. There were over 50 young people that were invited who were seeking out careers in the Arabian Peninsula. And of course, one of the sessions was on the future of jobs in archaeology. It's always a session, right? But the one thing we can say is that there's work to be done in the Arabian Peninsula. There's always work to be done here, a lot of work to be done. And if we can create jobs, as we're creating the interest for jobs, then we're all successful. It is a win for all of us.
Can I just add, I think it's also really important to start from the younger generation. So one of the things that we do at Louvre Abu Dhabi is we make the incentive. I mean, it's not just about Louvre Abu Dhabi. I think generally we really need to make the first step, not to wait for the ministry to, integrate it within the curriculum, but to do what we can do within it. So for example, before I was the cultural program manager at Louvre Abu Dhabi, I started the outreach at Louvre Abu Dhabi. And one of the first things we did, because we realized that we had very low numbers of visits from children's schools in Abu Dhabi, was to go to them. So we had a roadshow. And one of the key findings is this idea that a museum is for tourists. So that was one obstacle. And then what we actually did was how to make it relevant. How do we make artwork relevant to 14-year-old guys in Al Ain, and we're looking at really contemporary pieces, and then it just allowing them to interpret it. It was extremely interesting for us to ask, what do you see? Why do you think this should be important? And it becomes a dialogue with the new generation. We also have a lot of school visits at Louvre Abu Dhabi where we create specialized programs for them. So if there is a specific topic that they want to know about, we can show it to them through storytelling and the object itself in the museum. So again, I really feel the importance is to start from a very young generation and then look into, once they become quite accustomed with this, university will follow.
Well, thank you very much to our, we have one more. Please.
Yes, there is. So we work very closely with the Ministry of Education and ADEC. There's a lot of conversations that go in. There are teacher trainings that happen at Louvre Abu Dhabi. So I'm just going to talk about the museum and what we do. So specifically to that, yes, we do have teachers training. We have an MOU with the Ministry of Education. So there's a lot of visits that are happening. And I think there is also this conversations that are happening on the curriculum side. But again, I feel that there needs to be much more content that we're creating that unfortunately is lost, that could be integrated within the curriculum.
And just to pick up on that, from at Zayed National Museum, the content and the narrative will be interwoven into the curriculum, so that all the things that we're talking about, some of the things I've mentioned today, will be interwoven into the curriculum. And there's a very active school program. Some of the challenges which have been addressed here are best thought of as issues of knowledge ecosystem. Once you start to build up knowledge, it increases the sense of organized curiosity. Organized curiosity drives education, it drives expertise, and then things change. So I'm very optimistic, as I said in my first opening remarks, that there has always been enormous interest and support from government agencies for understanding history. So I think the future is bright from that perspective.
I want to thank you to all our panelists.
My pleasure.
My friends and colleagues here. for this discussion. We thank all of you for coming today, and we thank the National Library and Archives and Your Excellency for hosting us and having us today. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you everyone so much. We have the next session. So there are so many questions. I know that there are still a lot more questions hanging around, and we have the next session starting in 5 minutes. So if you can take a quick break, and we'll have Professor Peter McGee and Professor Timothy Power join us later. So any more questions, please save them for the next session. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good stuff. Well done.
Thank you.
Everything.
From here. Hello. Do I have Mr. Anthony here? I can't, I don't know, can we hear it from here?
Yeah, they can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, talk. Yeah, Anthony's here.
Is that Anthony or Christina?
No, it's Anthony.
Oh, right. Hi, sorry. Just wanted to check. We will start within 5 minutes.
Right.
So if you can just bear with us.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you so much. All right. Now you can just make the setting back to what it was.
Is the picture quality right for you or not? Okay.
Hello. Hi, it's me again, Namal.
Hi, is the picture quality all right? Do you want more light?
It's perfect. Nazim, are you okay with the picture quality? Can I see the screen? Oh, he's there. Okay. Yeah, it looks good. Can you remove it quickly? The picture quality is perfect. And when we're talking, Amna has told me that she will indicate when to play the clip.
Right. If she's gonna, I hope she's just gonna manage everything. I mean, in terms of the clip. Right.
We're managing everything. You just be there and have a chat with her. We'll manage everything else. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Can they hear them? I hope not. Okay. Okay. Next session on it. Next session on slide.
Right. Okay. Si escucha aiuto? أعتقد ماذا يقدر فيها.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to commence the next session. May I request everyone to take their seats? Thank you, everyone. I'd like to call upon Amna Abul Hol, Professor Timothy Power, Professor Peter McGee, and we have Anthony Geffen, who's appearing virtually. So please, I'd like to call everyone up on stage. Can we have Anthony Geffen appear on the screen as well?
Anthony?
Hi.
Hi. Good morning. Good evening, maybe virtually. I'm not sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the insightful session. It definitely changed all the questions this time. So it could be chapter 2.
Okay.
We're here to discuss, I'll introduce the team once again, but we're here to discuss the film. The film created about the history of the Emirates, which is a film that is a documentary that spans over 125,000 years ago of local history. The producer and director is Anthony Giffen, and the advisors of the film are both Professor Peter and Professor Timothy. And just on a brief highlight, Anthony Giffen is the CEO of the Atlantic Productions and one of the world's leading documentary filmmakers. Of course, all the other awards that award-winning filmmaker, but also Professor Peter, who did his excavation in Mueleh, and it's really an interesting site, I would say. And we will look deep into some findings and what came as close to you as pieces you found, because in the film it shows a lot of stories that it felt real instead of just from an archaeology space. And same with Professor Timothy. One thing I would like to add is I've shown the film to my grandmother. Oh. And it is such an interesting finding because she narrates stories. Some of them are true, some of them are not, as always, as every grandmother. But for me, stating some facts to her made her tear and made her realize that I understand something from her past. So this conversation will be all about how can we bridge the expertise and your knowledge and in your field with our grandmothers and grandparents who are sitting at home or doing their daily work, living their daily life. We are a generation that could merge the gap. And in this session, we will look at 3 clips from the film chosen, and we will discuss elements around it, because these are the films also I showed my grandmother. So my voice will be my grandma's voice. So it will be a dialogue. Please feel free to ask questions. It's a circle that we wanted to hear from everyone. I'll start with Anthony Giffen. If you can just give us a brief about the film and your findings around it.
Yeah, I mean, this for me was a fascinating 5 years of my life because I knew very little about the history of the UAE. And actually, when you started to read it in books, there was only a certain amount of it available anyway. It became even more daunting when I realized that 125,000 years of history was lying a lot often under a desert or in ruins. But we had, brilliant archaeologists here who are with us today. And my job was to say with the team, how can we bring this story alive? Who's the audience? The audience was going to be local Emiratis, but also a global audience, which we wanted to reach through National Geographic. So, the task was, and I made a number of historical films, was how do we make those dusty deserts come alive? So we used, and the stories, the personal stories, this is, 125,000 years. Sometimes there's just a fragment. So we worked very hard to use new technology such as LiDAR, so we could scan locations, often with the archaeologists. And this allowed us to bring the past back. Buildings are exciting once they come back to life and you can see what they were used for. With a lot of the people, the people's stories, we used animation, because animation is quite a nice technique. It's not necessarily the pure situation, but it gives you an idea of that moment in history. And then, the LiDAR, some of the LiDAR in the deserts were amazing. It allows us to look below the deserts, to bring a place like Jalfar back to life. And now it's just a sandy spit, but underneath there is a city, as the archaeologists have found, which has 50,000 people. So suddenly this is almost like literally unpeeling away the sand. And then other moments of history, I think, you can bring to life the phalange. How did that really work? It's difficult to understand how dramatic the achievements of that were. You know, inside all this, we have amazing human stories. We have archaeologists who are uncovering certain places where 2,000 years ago an ancient queen ruled. I mean, it started to make English history feel insignificant in a way, making this series. But it was difficult, but absolutely fascinating. And I think the archaeology that's being found in the UAE is amazing. But my job and the team's job was to literally take you on a journey, captivate you. And I think it worked. I mean, you know, millions and millions of people around the world, I think, who had an impression of the UAE as, you know, buildings and fast cars and a growing economy and oil, and actually suddenly thought, my God, the culture goes back a long, long way here. And we can understand that there was an Iron Age and other ages which in their own right were as important as what's happening today. But so for me, fascinating to work on. And with the ancillaries we had with virtual reality, we brought Casa Al Hassan back, we brought the Journey into the Empty Quarter. For kids, we brought a kind of Pokemon Go experience where you could collect characters from your past. That had a big impact, because today's media is no longer just television or film. It's a multimedia world where you need to speak to certainly the younger generation, as we know, on lots of different platforms. And we tried to do that. And I think those platforms were successful as well.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And you highlighted really something very important about the importance of AI and the technology. And the CGI in the film was really spot on. That I feel we can infuse it in our education system, where kids nowadays will enjoy it rather than just reading. And I believe the technology used gave justice to the location itself. Professor Peter, can you tell us about the location?
So one of the things which I think we're showing today is are we showing the three?
Yes.
Yeah, we are. It is a reconstruction of a site that we excavated in the north in Sharjah, a site called Muwayla. And that was a nice project which I started in 1995. And it was really one of those sites where the more you excavated, the more you realized that the site was much, much, much more complex than we could ever imagine. And as you'll see, in one area of the site, there is a building which contained the remnants of bases for columns, an enormous amount of artifacts located within it, which spoke to its function, and which we and then interpreted, and it's passed the test of peer review, that this was an early form of majlis, that this was an area in which people would sit and discuss problems which the community faced. And that ties it in, of course, with one of the fundamental aspects of Emirati society, not just in terms of the architecture, but in terms of the concept of shura and consultation. So for us, that was a nice way in which we could connect the site to the present.
Amazing. And this is really an interesting finding, because Majlis is still exists. And do you think it is based on the interpretation of what's happening on the houses nowadays? Or is it a finding that you discovered based on the artifacts that you find in the, where you call Majlis, in that location?
Yeah, so the interpretation was based upon the idea that it's not a domestic building, that it's a large building. There is evidence for the processing of large amounts of food. So
nothing changed.
Yeah, so we know that the people that no one was living in this building, but they would go to it and they would sit. There was large amounts of food being processed, particularly young sheep, very young sheep. Domesticated young camels were being consumed. And there was also very, very large jars to provide water to the guests. Those sorts of provisions, the nature of the building itself, the shape of it, that's what led us to believe that it represents the same sort of function as a Majlis has, which is an area of consultation where people would get together and discuss challenges that they faced.
Professor Timothy, can you let us know your finding within the film itself? Can you tell us your findings when you created with the team the movie?
Well, I mean, I was only tangentially involved with the film, and I was really a talking head. I was interviewed a little bit about the British invasion, occupation. Actually, I think they chose me because I'm a British passport holder. My research is actually in Islamic archaeology and history. So, yeah. Well,
I'm a British passport holder. They didn't choose me.
Well. But you're a lot more as well, Peter. This is really Peter's show. I mean, he was the one who really put everything together and did such a great job. I think telling the story of the history of the Emirates.
So we would play now the first part of the 3 films, and we can discuss it.
People came up with a highly advanced solution. A unique place for open discussion that still exists in the homes and palaces of Emiratis today. The first evidence appears 15 kilometers east of Sharjah city, in the ancient town of Muwayla. Inside the ring of a huge defensive wall is a cluster of homes and storehouses. This was a town built on the back of the new camel trade. But there's one building that stands out as something completely new.
As we were excavating, we noticed that there were these circular impressions on these stones and lots of burning. And we soon worked out that these were the remains of column bases, which have wooden columns coming up.
Using evidence uncovered here, we can now reconstruct what these columns were for. "20 of them, made of palm trunks, were surrounded by walls of compacted earth and mud brick. The columns supported a huge flat roof made of wooden beams, covered with matting and plaster. So what was this elaborate building for?
In other contexts, when a building like this is discovered, people might interpret it as some sort of palace or just the house of someone very, very important in the settlement. Here, I suspect that's not the case.
Dr. McGee is convinced that the hall was in fact built for the whole community. The clues came from a remarkable set of artifacts unearthed here. There was this ornate ceramic dome. It's the lid of an incense burner, often used at important gatherings. In the center of the hall was this huge pot, able to hold a staggering 1,600 liters of water. And in a side room, there was evidence of mass catering.
When we excavated this room, we found a thick layer of ash on the floor. And we also noticed that there were these indentations on the wall on both sides. I imagine this was like a rotisserie. There would have been a stick with an animal that was cooking over an open flame. Just outside this area, we found the remains of thousands of animal bones, mostly young sheep, lamb. And I could imagine this was a special meal. It was a meal that was cooked when people would gather in the central room.
This was a building for the whole town, a place to meet and hold communal feasts. And Dr. McGee believes this is evidence of a surprisingly open society.
What I suspect is that the building was used as a place for people from the settlement to get together and discuss things.
This is a snippet of the actual movie. And I personally saw it 3 times as of today. Anthony, can you speak to us about how did you took all these findings? Because it's interesting how to look at archaeology being told by an archaeologist, but how can you take it into a film using CGI and transforming it into a reality that is in your imagination based on the words that came from Professor Peter?
Well, I think in that sequence, you can actually see, there are ruins that we needed to bring back to life so the audience could understand what was going on there. Then there were pots, and it's almost like a jigsaw. What Peter's finding there is a jigsaw, and what our job. I mean, he can do it obviously and translate it brilliantly in written text, but here we're trying to engage a very broad audience on a story of a moment in time where for the audience we're discovering a piece of history, a fascinating piece of history, something that's very important here, this center of something that you have today. And so it's a question of working out how we're going to do that with CGI and other things. And here, what I wanted was, Peter to reveal his own findings, but as I say, to bring the building back, which I think is pretty significant. You've got to understand it and see it. And then those sort of details of the pots and things, which give us an understanding. And I love the moment Peter stands there and talks about the past. That you don't need to take something. You can visualize that in your own mind. The idea that people cooking but it really needs in a current world. It needs us to work hard, to translate that, because we're competing with a lot of noisy things that are going on in our society. And so the important thing about this documentary was to really bring it alive and to hook people, and it did that. I mean, the ratings in America, around the world went into that, went to huge figures. I mean, 500 million people, it's huge audiences. We never expected that. But the trick of the filmmaker is to make the narrative, keep people with the narrative, keep them on a journey through the 5 hours in Arabic and obviously the 3 hours in English. And that is harder and harder to do, but that's our job, and it's exciting to do. And this is a great history. So in a way, it was fun doing it. And I think we did certain elements in a very different way. Some of the animation really vividly brought alive moments in Emirati history.
And how many renditions, I would say, or versions until you came up with this? Of course, I'm sure there is a debatable conversation between Professor Peter and yourself. Can you let us know this?
Peter is a very hard taskmaster, which is great. He doesn't tolerate fools lightly, and is tough, which I love. I want somebody to be all over it, but we're trying to interpret it, but we're held to account for his research and making it work. And that was an absolute pleasure to work with someone who has incredible knowledge, but also is determined to get accuracy and the right stories across. But it's a balance too, because there are times, he has in his head, I guess, a vision of history, or not vision of a moment in history in a certain way, and we have to try to bring that alive in another way, another medium. But it was fascinating work. It's always fascinating. I worked all my life with archaeologists in different projects. It's fascinating working with them because they're shining lights on moments in history and bringing them alive. But luckily we've got we have new tools as filmmakers, and we're constantly bringing. There's a moment in the film which actually it was a kind of ooh-ah moment where we brought the desert, very simple, but we brought the desert back to life from thousands of years ago. And people suddenly, oh my gosh, the desert wasn't a desert. But television or film has a great way of showing that. If you just shown a picture of it, it's fine, but to actually bring the whole desert back to life as it was, and that it was very, very different and green is a big shock to people.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. In fact, we were very lucky in the production of that. The chairman of Imagination, Mohammed Mubarak, is also the chairman of the Department of Culture and Tourism. It was always clear that the instructions from him were that the science should be respected, and all of those back and forth conversations with all of your team who were so respectful of that idea and so listening and so accommodating. I remember once we filmed something, it took all day. Someone was holding an animal bone and they were talking about camel domestication. And at the end of the day, after 6 hours of shooting, I said, actually, that's the bone of a donkey. And we had to throw all of that footage out and start again. And so as an advisor on the film, I really like the idea that there was this openness to science and to rigor and to It's not the truth, but it's science and rigor. Yeah.
Professor Timothy, I know you're specialized in Al Ain Oasis and the landscape. Have you seen any resemblance of these two locations based on the film? Or do you feel it's two different civilizations living at the same time?
Well, I mean, at Mawela, you have this columned hall, and this is a kind of regular feature of these Iron Age settlement sites. And there's one in Al Ain, famously at the Rumaila. They're found actually all over southeastern Arabia. And there's a number of interpretations. Of course, Peter has his Majlis theory. I think what's interesting about this documentary and the way it was filmed, in some ways, you can sort of tell it's kind of intended, it's a product for the Middle East and it's intended, okay, for an international audience, okay, fair play. But, there's this idea of a kind of quite a linear narrative. I think, if a film was done in the UK or Northwestern Europe for a kind of, for a sort of an audience in those countries, I think it probably would have been a little bit more reflective about the archaeological method and the relationship between the evidence and the interpretive theories. I mean, usually, you'd have maybe multiple interpretations. And the nice thing about CGI actually is that you can very easily, communicate multiple interpretations. So yeah, I think, that was something that I found very interesting. But I think what's really invaluable about this kind of stuff is that, you talk about the CGI scene where they kind of green the desert. Right? There's this whole area about Jebel Faya where it kind of like comes back to life, and I think that's really evocative. I mean, with my students, trying to kind of talk to them about this period of Arabian history, they're just so used to this kind of rocky, sandy landscape. Very difficult for them to imagine that it was different. So yeah, I think that sort of thing where you can actually recreate whole landscapes, not just buildings. I think that's really valuable actually, and is a great way to communicate without having to say lots of words.
And that scene where we reconstructed the landscape around Jebel Faya, it was, and around Jebel Buhais and Sharjah, and it was showing that it was, let's say 8,000 years ago, there was more rainfall during the Holocene climatic optimum. And I remember working with Anthony's team, and it went back and forth because we weren't happy with the types of trees that were being represented. Some were introduced, some were not native at that time. And so that scene is particularly evocative because the vegetation can be verified. That's the things that we are seeing at the time from archaeological sites, those sorts of plants. But I agree with you that it was that to be able to visualize that is extremely powerful. Yeah.
This is really interesting. I will reflect my grandma's finding on this scene, and she's 91 years old. And she was telling me when she saw it, because she won't understand what was saying. She said, my brother used to learn Quran in this place. So she's 91 years ago, and this is like 125,000 years ago. Yeah. But she saw it differently from interior perspective. That it was, they used to listen to Quran here, and it's like the school. And then she would say, the food should be in the corner. The thing on the wall, usually we don't put this. So she kept telling me, thinking I'm the one who did it. And I was like, yeah, sure, I got credit from her. That's perfect. Sorry, Anthony, I took credit on your behalf. But I was like so happy thinking like she was proud. And I didn't want to burst her bubble, but hopefully one day I'll make her proud. But she was really happy to actually see it. She asked me to print it for her and to hang it in her living room. Just thinking that for her it's a moving image. She didn't realize it's a film or all of this. And she said, we didn't have anything to capture before. So the innocence of her questions to me were endless. And she expects me to come to her every week to show her something. I hope she just forget about it because I don't have much. But this is an interesting finding. Do you think if you had grandmothers and grandfathers at that time that you have access to show them your work in progress, do you think things might change? Yes, please.
Look, I think that's a fantastic account of what CGI does, and that is that it like that building, walking around it, it's very difficult to understand it as a as a non-archaeologist. So what the CGI did is it prompted your grandmother to see connections and reflections to her own personal and cultural narrative. And that's exactly what we want. I have a theory about it, but that theory of the building it's not exclusive. It doesn't mean that, we never think of one space as having just one function. And it's entirely possible, even though the building is pre-Islamic, that it was the space in which people would sit and contemplate or read in the same way that someone would sit later and contemplate the Quran. So that sort of personal interpretation, I think, is exactly what as archaeologists and historians we want. And the sort of school of history and archaeology, which Tim and I academically grew up on, is one which emphasizes the multivocality of the past, that there are different voices all the time, and that we listen to them. And I think so. I'm thrilled to hear that your grandmother had that reaction.
Thank you. We can play film number 2.
See the most spectacular evidence from this age. We're visiting the ancient site of Malaya. A team of experts here are using radar scanners to search underground for the remains of a lost city. And what they've found are the foundations of towers built to mark ancient tombs. This was once a huge cemetery.
We find the whole series almost like a street of these tomb towers, which means that this is really a concentration of very important monumental tombs. So one of the major areas of this graveyard.
Using the new data, we can start to see what it looked like. The towers rose to a height of several meters. On top was a layer of stepped blocks, like the battlements on a fort. It's thought that over 100,000 dead were laid to rest here.
This is really interesting to see that there were civilizations before, and it's interesting to feel that they left. Is it due to lack of water? Is it the temperature is so high? Is it something that happened that made them vanish for years and then another civilization come? And this is where history will always be interpretation, but without archaeology, we will never know what happened before us. Anthony, how did you come up with this interpretation segment of these tombs? And
well, again, the beauty here is that the archaeologists had got all this amazing data. So in this particular instance, what we had to do is we just had to bring it back to life, which was quite exciting. But again, how could you imagine an area like this, if you haven't seen it? How could you imagine thousands of tombs? And actually, I thought the clip was going to go on a little bit longer, but I think again, it's what there's a lot of feedback from this series now, and so we didn't get everything perfect, but the feedback was that kids and people around the world, and Timothy's right. When I make films for the BBC or PBS or I can intercut them, but there's no understanding here of any of the history, so you can't be clever with a narrative. We realized after a lot of research the only narrative was linear, and we didn't have time to have conflicting academic views. We just had to try to piece together a narrative that people could follow. It just wouldn't have worked for this audience. But once again, there we look at the data that they had. It was magic. But actually, what's interesting? Often with the archaeologists, when we've brought our bit of the storytelling back to life, they're quite interested because they hadn't really seen it that way either. And certainly when I made worked for years with David Attenborough when we interpreted the past or worlds that he hadn't seen or creatures we hadn't seen, I brought them back. He was gobsmacked because he couldn't imagine what they were really like. It's only when you recreate them in this way, I think, that you have a visualization of them.
Professor Timothy, have you seen something like that in the way you look in Al Ain and the surroundings you thought of? Have you seen something similar in the Islamic world or the Arab world around the region?
Yeah, sure. I mean, with this film, I think they do a good job actually with recreating these urban landscapes. First in Malaysia, there's also another site they do at Julfar in Ras Al Khaimah where they kind of bring it back to life. And again, I think, it is, CGI is fantastic for that because when you go there today, I mean, it's just these kind of flat, eroded plains and it all just pops out. What's quite nice, I think, with that particular clip, there's a sort of methodological issue where you see the geophysical survey then being animated and turned into these tower tombs. So that, I think, is quite useful as well. One thing that I do note is that, the idea of soundscape. Okay, so a lot of this, there's kind of a voiceover going over kind of animations. I mean, I know in some of the other clips there is more of a kind of, sort of historic soundscape. But, when you deal with places like, the church at Siabanias, for example, or the one we found in Gawain recently, there you can actually not just, bring the buildings to life, but because we actually have the Syriac liturgy and the hymns which would have been sung and chanted in these buildings, you can actually use that, I think, in a very evocative way. Because I mean, obviously, as human beings, we have our five senses, and we're all kind of, all of these are very evocative, so we get kind of smell kind of TV. I mean, sound and visual combined together is a really powerful combination, actually, and I think tremendously evocative of the kind of an emotional resonance as well as a sort of factual documentary.
And do you think, Professor Peter, that maybe this civilization that were here, they went to somewhere else, Saudi Arabia, is there a finding from an archaeology perspective that they are travelers?
So that particular site, Malayha in Sharjah, dates from the 3rd century BC to about the 4th century CE, maybe a little bit later. And I think we shouldn't, I think it's hard for us to conceptualize that at certain periods in history, there is this growth or efflorescence of the economy, and that is reflected in what is found at that site. It's a very, very rich archaeological site. It provides the first widespread use of a written language. We had a previous question in the previous session about Musnad and Aramaic. Both Musnad script and Aramaic are used at that site for the first time in a widespread way. There are earlier examples from the Iron Age, but I don't think it's as if they disappear. I think it's more that for whatever reason, I tend to think, given my background as a prehistorian, that it's to do with climate, but it doesn't always have to be to do with climate. It can be to do with a broader economic system which exists, that it becomes a challenge and then people move on. They go somewhere else, or they just change the way they relate to the land. And we see this in UAE history quite a lot, that people are very flexible. They're resilient, but they're flexible in the way in which they create success. And so in this case, my interpretation is that that particular site came to an end maybe because of some sort of climatic shift, or perhaps a broader breakdown in the economy. There was this particular site was a regional trading hub. We don't know. Others might see it as a more historical phenomenon, but to me, it probably relates back to climate and economics. Yeah.
What's interesting with the CGI is I looked at it very Mesopotamian clay architecture style. Will it be perhaps, and this is where it's hard to define, is it the United Arab Emirates history or civilization, or is it the travelers and the people around? And this is where I would like to hear from each one of you. What is your input in this when it comes to history? Because United Arab Emirates is formed 53 years ago, 52 years ago, but we're talking about 125,000 years ago. And with the Mesopotamians want to take over the whole area, I'm sure they stopped by Ras Al Khaimah because it's the hub before they go to India and China and everywhere. What is your finding, Professor Timothy, about this?
Well, I mean,
it's a great question.
It is.
Yes.
So I think, look, we're talking about Malaya here, so we can use this as a specific case study. Malaya is really a fantastic site plugged into international trade, and there are clearly very strong links with Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, the use of Aramaic, as Peter was saying, but also the ceramic assemblage, the numismatic assemblage. There's a lot of Iraqi influence there. What's really interesting with those tower tombs is that their architecture fits into a broader Arabian tradition. We have freestanding tower tombs at Palmyra, Tadmor in Syria. We also have carved into the rock at Petra and Madain Salah in Sham and the Hejaz, these evocations of tower tombs. Okay, so really you're looking at a kind of tradition which is all over the kind of northern fringes of Arabia on the kind of the fringe of the Fertile Crescent. So there, there are issues about to what extent these communities were interacting with each other, to what extent they shared a heritage, to what extent they were the same people. The excavators in Malaya believe that the people who settled there in the third century BC, were actually migrating away from northern Arabia. Okay, but then you could argue, well, hang on, maybe it's a kind of acculturization process where local people adopt international trends. So you can pitch it in different ways. I think with that animation at Malaya, there is an issue because, and this is, Anthony has to work with the archaeologists and he has to deal with the archaeological data set as it exists. And at Malaya, the problem is really the archaeologists are focused very much on the tombs and on the public buildings. So we don't really know much about the landscape context of Malaya. We don't know about its agricultural systems, about where it got its food from, where the irrigation happened, where the wells were from. There's a lot of missing pieces there. So, I think that it means that the city's kind of divorced slightly from its landscape context, which is slightly problematic. And nothing at all to do with Anthony, but really, I think more work is needed to kind of get that bigger picture.
It's always a debatable question. Professor Peter?
No, I think Tim's right. Those towers, they represent a sort of pan-Arabian architectural tradition, which stretches as far as Palmyra, Tadmor, all the way down through the Hejaz. And but I think there's whether or not we're thinking about it as the civilization of the United Arab Emirates, is that we have to conceive of it as that this area has simultaneously always had strong traditions while absorbing things from the outside. And from Malaya, I know the interpretation of the archaeologists, the current ones concerning the migration of people there and the previous ones about the migration from somewhere else, that we have to be careful not to equate material culture with people. What I see at Malaya is just a continuation of local traditions, but a bigger absorption of material culture from elsewhere, because they're trading. They're trading with people around the peninsula and through to India and through to East Africa and Egypt at the time. So it's much more of a cosmopolitan society. And just on Tim's last point, in fact, recently there's been a lot of work done on the landscape of that site, showing that people were growing figs, they were growing grapes, they were growing a wider range of crops, and critically, they had rice, which would have been coming in from northwestern India probably, and rice as a staple cultivar is of course now one of the staple foods of the UAE. That site provides the first evidence when rice becomes available as a commodity. So there's the link in terms of history.
Yeah. And Anthony, how did you find it relevant with the region? The way you did the CGI and the clay, the way you designed the CGI elements of the findings of the archaeology.
Yeah, a lot of work, because we were working with experts who had so much information. We were determined, in something like this, we want to get it right. Either you do it or you don't do it right. So I think the buildings, and that these are just one set of buildings. I mean, there must be 30 or 40 sets of buildings in the whole film or series of films. Each one we tried to treat literally as what would it look like? Have we got the stone right? Have we, all those details, because this thing has to stand the test of time. You cannot remake this series. The one thing I will say though to Timothy is that you saw probably some of the offshoots of this series were early virtuality. Don't forget, this was several years ago now. Well, the new technology we're now working on with people like Apple are quite extraordinary, and I intend to, obviously with Imagination as well, I hope at some point to go back to those sites, not back to the sites, but back to the CGI, put them in these headsets where the headsets are in your own space and you can actually walk around those headsets. And then in a different experience, I've been developing technology with other partners where you can actually, a sense of smell comes, and that's mind-blowing. We did that with pretty ancient culture in the Amazon, and their whole world is about smell. And we brought it back and delivered in a kind of virtual pod. And it's incredibly powerful once you smell the world that you're seeing. So, we're not that far away. And I think it is important actually to, exactly as Timothy says, to be inside those worlds. So we're not far away from it. But I hope we did it as much as we could in the film. I mean, an awful lot of effort, all I can say, is went into getting it as accurate as it can be. And actually, I don't know why these clips seem to have stripped off the soundtrack, because we believe hugely in music and sound. So maybe it's other parts of the film are populated with it. But I agree totally. Sound is so important. And the beauty of the new world of which I believe is going to take the world by storm, the immersive world which is coming, is that you live in this incredible soundscape. Imagine your Apple AirPods on steroids inside that world. You feel like you're there, and I can't wait. I should be coming to the UAE soon to tell people about what's coming in terms of the new immersive era, but it is going to be completely radically different than anything we've had before.
This is really interesting, because I think what students are lacking is the engagement and being part of something, and 90% are gamers. Let's be open to it. What if
Can I just hop? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you just before you dropped it. One of the things we've been doing work with Harvard Medical School on is to assess the impact that these new headsets have. And what's, forget VR, this is nothing like anything you've ever seen before. What's extraordinary is you learn in the headset 4 times faster than you would normally. Your memory retention is 75% better. Now, why is this? Because we are 3D animals. We see in a 3D world. So for a start, we're constantly seeing everything in 2D. You give a kid or an adult a world in which they're seeing in 3D, they're absorbing in a different way. Then the most important thing, and why I wanted to jump on your gaming concept there, was once you start to interact, and they've tracked people's brains in a very safe way. Basically, the whole brain comes alive because you're interacting in that space. So we're taking on mediums that are the most important mediums for kids, in areas that they can engage in, learn in fast, and visit the past or visit the future or the present.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what would actually attract the young ones, like Ali Shamsi highlighted about educating the young ones. If we take them back to 125,000 years, we are the gap that should merge between our past and the future. And I think it's our duty to make sure we create more of these immersive experiences that takes the findings from the archaeology, bringing it with filmmakers, taking it directly to all the senses a child would actually feel. I know we're short of time, so we might not play the third part. I'm sure there are so many questions, so I would ask if anyone has any questions.
Hello, Anthony. Thank you. It's Isabel here. That was amazing. I don't know if you can see the audience, but we're in the audience here. Thank you so much for joining us very early from the UK. My question is to Peter. How did you know there were 100,000 graves?
Yeah, so that was a very robust discussion. So the excavator of the site, Dr. Bruno Overlay from the Royal Museums of Art and History in Brussels, is the excavator. He's the director of the project, and that was the number of graves that he estimated. Now, I'm not in the position to question him, and I felt that he knows the site very well. But I have no reason to believe it's not in some way accurate, because although in that clip you see these tower tombs, we know that they were not, everyone wasn't buried in them. There would have been single graves of less wealthy, powerful people buried across that landscape. And if we think about it from a numeric perspective, which is that the settlement of Malaya, let's say, existed for 600, 700 years. Life expectancy at that time, 35 to 40 years old would be average life, maybe closer to 40 at that time. 40 years old life expectancy. Population of 10, 15,000 people, maybe. Then it's just a mathematics. If one person dies every 35 years, it doesn't take long to get to 100,000. And even more. And so I think that's the sort of numeric assessment that they made to come up with that number. The other thing which I would say in that regard, and it's something Tim alluded to, is that one of the reasons why Malaya is so incredible as an archaeological site is precisely because there was nothing built on top of it later. It's an issue of the discovery of the site. I'm reasonably certain that Al Ain would have been equally important at that time, but of course it's a modern city in which is a lot more obscured than Malaya. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Then we can wrap it up. This was an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony, so much. Thank you, Professor Peter.
Can we finish the session with the final clip? Because it kind of pulls everything together.
Why not?
That would be great. Thank you.
Third one.
Why not?
Thank you.
Ingenious techniques like this enabled Arab mariners of the 14th and 1500s to trade far and wide. And so ports around the Gulf grew in size and stature. We can see this most clearly in the northern city of Ras Al Khaimah. Just up the coast from the city centre are these deserted dunes. But beneath them lie the remains of Ibn Majid's hometown, the mighty port city of Julfar. Excavations here have revealed just how successful trade in the Emirates had become.
Julfar was really the biggest town in what you would call now the United Arab Emirates, and one of the largest towns in the Arabian Gulf in the medieval ages.
Today, all that's visible of this ancient port is the footprint of its mosque. But by using the evidence of archaeology, we can reveal what the entire city was like in its heyday. It is built on a massive scale, stretching up and down the coast for 7 kilometers. And with almost 40,000 residents, it was a fusion of cultures.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'd like to call upon the speakers for the next session. We'll start a bit early so that we're just careful with time. I hope everyone's mic'd up. All right. So can I have the next slide, please, for the next session? Thank you. So the next session is Enlightenment by Information. May I request everyone to come a little forward, the people sitting at the back. We've got Sanam Yaqub, Mr. Abdul Rahman Al-Zabi, we've got Dr. Ahmed Al-Shuaibi, and Mahnaz Fancy. Thank you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa sahlan, and a very, very warm welcome to the last of these 3 sessions today at this really inspiring venue, the National Library and Archives, home to the nation's history and heritage. We are sitting amongst the archives, which are, in essence, witnesses to our past. They provide evidence, explanation, and justification, both for our past actions and our current decisions. Now, let us ponder for a short moment and consider the rich tapestry of conversations that have emerged during the course of the morning. What ideas and thoughts have you embraced already? What has led you to wonder and to be more curious about? And what is still circling in your mind? As you reflect, allow me to invite you to this last session today, Enlightenment Through Information. We explore how education systems are formed based on historical data, what are the gaps identified, and who determines these decisions. Why are archival systems important for the youth? And what other ways are being appointed to disseminate knowledge to expatriates watching the world? Now, our panelists today bring with them their unique perspectives. So allow me to introduce you to them. Dr. Ahmed Al-Shuaibi is an educator and an author of children's books. He's a professor of chemical engineering at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi. The Tales of Hamad was Dr. Shuaibi's first endeavor in creative writing and was followed by The Tales of Aisha. He's since established a published house, Al-Rawawi Publishing and Book Trading, which focuses on preserving Emirati culture and ensuring the legacy of our forefathers and foremothers. And he ensures that these are recited to our children constantly. Mehnaz Fancy, a cultural critic and author of comparative literature, whose academic research focuses on the impact of cultural exchange between Europe and the Muslim world in the 18th and 19th centuries. Mehnaz is an arts advisor with over 20 years of leadership roles in building US and UAE-based institutions. She continues her engagement in the development of the Mensa cultural ecosystem in her current role as principal art researcher at the UAE Ministry of Culture and Youth. And Abdul Rahman Al-Zabi is an Emirati tour guide and an engineer working in the Defense Secretary in Abu Dhabi. While studying abroad, he spent many times traveling and exploring different countries. And after moving back to the UAE, he realized how little he knew about his own city. His curiosity led him to gain more knowledge and share what he learned on social media. And soon after that, he successfully gained the tour guide license and helped him to plan tours and write and publish self-guided tours as well. So the stage is set, the author educator, the scholar, the tour guide, and we almost have a brilliant cast here for our own UAE-based historical documentary. I don't know if there are any directors in the room, but please give a very warm welcome to our panelists today. Now thank you so much. Let's dive straight in, enlightenment through information. Now, one of the ways that the great philosopher Immanuel Kant described enlightenment was having the courage to use your own understanding. And each of you, through your different roles, have taken on the social responsibility of sharing your understanding, sharing your knowledge, and sharing your information to the wider community. And before we delve into the specifics of that, I'm really curious about your own perspectives and what is the value and contribution that archives represent within your areas of specialism. So Ahmed, if I can come to you first, you reminded me earlier on about the quotes of our founding father, Sheikh Zayed, who infamously said that one who does not know their past will never know their future. What value do archives bring, particularly for you as an Emirati, in fulfilling that vision of Sheikh Zayed?
Thank you. So first of all, I have to say it's wonderful to be here among my co-panelists. And the previous session, watching those clips were actually very emotional. And that kind of ties into your question. I'll get there. What's the connection for me, at least, has been. I'm a very proud Emirati, and I think many of us here, whether Emirati or residents, we're very proud of this country. And although a young country, has a significant past that goes years and years, hundreds of years before the establishment of the modern UAE. I think archives, by definition, is our way of capturing the past, recording the past. And we're lucky that we're in a country that both embraces the future as well as held close our identity, our heritage. You mentioned one of my favorite quotes from the founding father of UAE, Sheikh Zayed, that we really need to know our past to be able to understand our future. So archives do that, right? They capture the history. Archives in the past, traditionally, they used to be protected because nobody wants to tamper with them. You want to hold the primary sources, under a lot of protection. But nowadays, archives are with technology are more and more accessible. Access is one thing, though. Breathing life into them is different. What we watched earlier, that's breathing life into a primary source and making it not only accessible, making it actually, I think the moderator was mentioning that her grandmother was able to relate to it, and she would constantly ask questions. My target audience is slightly different. I write children's books about the UAE culture and heritage. I hope to find inspiration from primary sources, from the archives, from history, and that inspires me to create art, to create literature, children's books in my case, that breathes new life into this information that has been captured. So that is how I use archives in educating youth about who they are. And I really believe that once they know who they are, their own identity, they will also be able to see their future.
Thank you, Ahmed. I think you've raised a really important point there around them being accessible, but also inclusive as well. And we'll come on to that later when we explore that within the education systems. Similarly, Mehnaz, as a scholar and researcher, where do you place the value of archives in the work that you do?
Thank you. Been thinking a lot while listening to the earlier panel. I have mine, and yet I did refuse to use it. Thank you. Archives are incredibly important to me and my work, because it's very, the historical context for me is an incredibly valuable first step. But like the CGI imaginations of what Maliha and Julfar might have been like, I've ended up working with artists who take research-based practices and then similarly imagine how we can put these pieces together. From being a kind of more rigid academic, having to prove every single point, I've become somebody who works entirely in the creative space and finds value in content of all kinds of forms, from the personal anecdotes, from the oral history. I mean, I love that, from the smell, from the feeling. I've worked with architecture, I've worked with visual arts of all forms, with film. There are as humans, we really do have access to so much information via our various senses. And then we have this incredible gift of imagination, and that allows us to process it, to analyze it, and reshape it. I'm just going to say one thing with my Ministry of Culture hat on, which is that the kind of freedom and imagination that we are given to make sense of the world we live in, the world we found ourselves in originally, and where we've ended up, these are incredible acts of imagination, I think. But there is something very high stakes at some level about national identity, which is what a national archive does. And I kind of love the idea that in this moment, we are collecting all kinds of data, whatever form of format it takes, and not being too stodgy in a way that, academic, scientific rigor requires. The humanist endeavor that is behind a national archive requires a kind of more open thinking. So, okay, that's.
Thank you so much, Mehnaz. And Abdurrahman, as a tour guide, and in your interaction with whether that's residents or tourists, how do archives occupy that space, and what value do they bring to you, please?
Tremendous value. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm humbled to be part of this panel. I want to start with giving a little bit of a picture. On my way here, I saw a sign pointing at, the city, Abu Dhabi. And I went back and remembered the fact that a lot of people, when they translate Abu Dhabi to English, they call it the father of the gazelle, which is, to me, is such a Google translation of what Abu Dhabi means. So if you want to draw from, an archive, you can use as simplest form is you can use Arabic language to explain to you what does Abu Dhabi actually means. And the fact that the city Abu Dhabi is part of an island, and we have a thing about calling islands by a specific name, and this one is called the Island of the Antelope. Dhabi is actually a word in Arabic that points to antelopes. So for me, access to such information gave me the drive to investigate. And now I'm not simply enlightened by information, but I'm enlightened by curiosity. I want to know, why is it called the Island of the Antelope? Eventually, this led me to understand that the fact that Abu Dhabi was founded in the 1700s by hunters coming all the way to this way from Liwa, and discovering that it's such a lush place that has resources, and building a defense fort, which ends up being currently part of Qasr al-Husn in the middle of Abu Dhabi. Archaeology to me brings everything to light and brings a lot of background to the history of the city.
And I can almost imagine going on a tour guide with you, because just in those words, you're bringing everything to life and echoing the words that we heard before, breathing life into that. I think your point around curiosity is particularly interesting. And the place where I have found curiosity in abundance is in schools, in working with youth. You could almost hear the hubble of curiosity. So let's turn our attention to education systems, if we will, for a short while, and build on the point that education systems are formed from historical data, and historical systems and education systems in their broadest sense, not just schools, because you come from different perspectives. Mehnaz, from your experience, if I can come to you first, please, as a scholar and researcher, how have national archives emerged in the UAE, and how do you feel historical data informs those education systems, given that we're now striving towards a knowledge economy, but we need to do so on a very solid footing for the future?
Should I? No, thank you. My microphone assistant. I think National Archives, this National Archive has been around since before the country was officially started, which is important to think about. What Sheikh Zayed was very aware of in that moment is, what does a modern nation need? And you see those elements, whether it's the National Theater, Qasr al-Husn's, the foundation, the Cultural Foundation. All of these were key elements for this modern nation to be identifiable as modern. What I find really interesting about this moment in the National Archive is adapting it to our actual condition. Without a long history, i.e. documented history, the archive is not populated by the kinds of books that the 18th century concept of national archives is traditionally defined as. What I find brilliant is this moment of thinking about what a national archive for the UAE would contain, how technological advances would permit access to wider audiences. As a researcher sitting in the US, I was endlessly frustrated by my inability to receive material. So I'm really excited for, how much more knowledge and knowledge production will take place in the future. But I really want us to think about what content will be included. And I look forward to hearing more as you go forward with that.
Thank you, Mehnaz. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially as archives move. And we've heard flavors of that this morning, from the traditional archives to something which is a bit more contemporary and accessible. Ahmed, if I can come to you in your sort of role as educator and author, and through the work that you represent, could you think about and share with us any gaps in maybe education systems. How could they be identified and potentially addressed?
What I believe in, it's not really a gap. I think it's links between different establishment resources that are available. So we have the National Archives here. We have agencies that run educational sectors, whether regulators or operators. We have historians. But how do we link all these people together, right? How do we make sure that there is enough, not only access, but usability when we are developing our curricula for schools? How do we engage? So archivists, typically, they know the content, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't argue with an archivist about a date, for example, or what specific material, which era it comes from, and so on. But I think teachers also know lesson plans, what works well for the students, what motivates them, how they learn, and so on. If there is a gap, if any at all, I would say bringing these two together, bringing educators and archivists to work together to create lessons plans that have the historical significance and access to primary sources that are really, really important. But at the same time, put it in a format that is that students can learn from. So putting together, for example, like I said, lesson plans and so on. And community engagement is really important, because I think sometimes, I'm an educator, we think that learning is confined to a classroom. Learning is all around us. Experiential learning is really, really important. You know, taking your son or daughter or your student to a museum can be very profound, and can actually, research suggests that these experiential learning have more impact on the career of someone when they are in their youth, right around 3rd to 5th grade, than anything else that they do, right? This is, if you think about it, it's very, very impactful, very profound. So we should really expand our definition of learning. So giving access to these primary sources in whatever format at an early stage, in a way that, like I said, teachers know what motivates their students best, in a way that is understandable, motivating for youth. I think that link is important, and also with parents, because like I said, education is not only in schools. We are all educators here. Every one of us has a responsibility to educate youth about our past, about our country, about our values and our national identity.
I think this is probably music to Isabel's ears, the collaboration and between the stakeholders of parents, teachers, and archivists. Staying with you, Ahmed, whose voice do you think is the loudest at the moment between the educators and archivists? Where are we in that continuum or progression, and where do we need to go?
It's a very good question. I'll answer. Maybe it will be controversial.
This is what today's about, right? We heard right at the beginning that our opinions are our own.
Youth themselves, they are the loudest. They are the loudest, and we should listen to them. Now with social media and with so many different platforms, I think they are crying for attention, and we should listen to what they really want and how they enjoy learning. If the pandemic taught us anything, especially particularly in the field of education, is that we can do so much more. We can be so much more student-centric, learner-centric. And I think their voice is the loudest, even though it's not captured, but they're yelling at us like, please change the system. We want to learn in different ways. We want to learn different things. We want to learn things that are very important that we can utilize in everyday life. And I think that's the loudest voice, and it should be the most consequential in my view.
Thank you so much. That's really good. We'll come back to that. I could see you, Mehnaz, nodding there on many points as well. Abdurrahman, and as a tour guide, you're most definitely educating people beyond the realms of the classroom, right? You're really taking them around. How can what you do be immersed in the sometimes rigid nature of education systems, or vice versa? How do you use your platform as a classroom to merge with the education system?
That's an interesting question. I never thought of what I do as a classroom, but I guess it is in some ways. Well, I have to start first by saying my mom is actually an educator, and I think if I get this from anyone, it'll be from her. Well, at the end of the day, what is important for people, right? Especially nowadays, most of people's attention go to the platforms that you mentioned, social media, internet, etc. I don't know, in terms of statistics, whether people read books now more than before. I would assume not as much anymore. But here's the thing, this is not necessarily a bad thing, right? You just have to meet the people where they are, and you have to talk to them in a language they understand. And this is why I think, to some degree, the type of work I do is relevant. Maybe not as relevant as, lesser research topics are, but at the end of the day, when you're speaking to people, they're giving you their time, they're giving you their lifetime, and this is the most important aspect of their life. Are you gonna just talk about random stuff, or are you gonna give them something that they're gonna go home and be inspired by it? And this is where I approach this subject.
Thank you so much. Mehnaz, did you want to add anything to yeah?
In listening to both my co-panelists, I really wanted to say that lifelong learning that happens through culture, reading groups, families, this kind of sense of belonging that is created out of that, and the exchange of knowledge, ideas, is fundamental to a place like this. A place like this, meaning one that has this very fluid and shifting cultural makeup. It's still a crossroads. Crossroads are places of syncretism, of exchange, of innovation, as much as they were when the Portuguese came through along the Indian Ocean in the 15th century. This is still going on. And these human moments of exchange and dialogue are key to everything we do outside of education. So I keep hearing us talking about the obstacle of the education sector, but we need to take advantage of all the other opportunities we have. And that's what I love about my co-panelists. It's a good reminder that we all have agency and a voice in these moments.
So how do we ensure, and on that point, I'll stay with you, Mehnaz, and on that point, you mentioned the fluidity, how do we ensure with the rapid development that's going on, how do we ensure that the UAE remains flexible within that as people come, they stay here for a while, or they go?
I don't know, but I don't know how to answer that, but I will answer it with a different answer than the question wanted, I think. I was a child in Abu Dhabi in the second half of the 70s, and I moved to New York after that. You can imagine what Abu Dhabi was like in that 70s moment. And I moved to New York, and I remember being 9, 10, and having this awareness that for the first time I was in a homogeneous space. So I've moved back, 30, maybe a little more, 35 years later. And viscerally, I experience living here as I can be all of myself. This fluidity of the culture is, to me, fundamentally linked to who we are as cosmopolitan global citizens who can get on a plane and move from one end to the other. I come back to living here and I'm like gobbling up the history, working in Sharjah. And, it makes sense with my family history of Pakistanis who were in East Africa. This is a narrative, this crossroads narrative, again, that so many of us can belong to and contribute to the national narrative, as we may have, or our ancestors or similar people may have at other moments. And this is the dynamic part of it. And this is what I find fascinating. as an American who has decided that I want to live here, right?
And I'm sure that your story just there, the words that you shared with us, echo and resonate with so many of us as we reflect on our own narratives. And we've heard a common theme today in all the talks today, and certainly what we're picking up now, is the idea of the preservation of identity, is the preservation of values and culture, and how these are collected and recorded within the archives. Who owns those? Who owns that story? Or is it a collective? And Ahmed, coming to you, the UAE, we know, is historically an oral society. The history in poems and folk tales we heard earlier on. And so the role of educating youth, I'm going to come back to your points around youth, educating the youth isn't just the exclusive rights of the teachers or within the classroom. Can you talk a bit more about the experiential learning that you mentioned before, and other ways that we can introduce youth to the archives and disseminate that information? What else can we do?
So Arabs have long been, it's not just the UAE, Arabs have long been a very oral society. We don't write much. I have a pen, but we don't write much. But I think that was their way of entertainment. That was their way of saving information. That was their art form, right? The Arabic language is extremely, extremely rich. And so, some civilizations, I think, used painting, some, what we were really strong as an art form is literature and the power of the word, right? In this case, oral. So I think a lot of the history, the previous, one of the previous panelists said something about capturing the sound, which I found really, really, I think the sound is very important. So as we recite poems, there's a rhythm to it, right? And especially if you've heard, I'm sure most of you heard in Arabic, there's a rhythm to it. And you can almost know, even if I don't know the poet, from the way they recite their poem, I'll know almost who's that poet, right? I think that can cut across many things. One of the earliest memories I have as a child growing up here is my father teaching me how to pour coffee for the guests in the majlis, how distant you should be, how much of a bow you should give, all of these things. You mentioned experiential learning. That's learning. Because every single thing in that, just the simple act of generosity, pouring coffee for a guest, there's a technique and a reason for each one of each step. The distance, how much of the cup should be full. If it's too much, people will think you're too lazy not to serve them again, and so on. There's a reason, there's a logic for everything. A simple act, but you don't learn this in a classroom, right? And there are many. This is just one of my early memories. This is experiential learning at its best, teaching youth about what, not only like you should do this and you should not do that, but why, right? Because a big part of learning is not actually receiving the information. A big part of learning, called cycle of experiential learning, is reflection.
Yes.
Right? So after we do something and we actually reflect on it, like why? Why did this work? Why did this not work? Why did it feel good? Why was I thriving when I was doing this or not? Both the successes and the failures. The reflection is actually one of the most important parts of the cycle of learning. And I think as we do that with our kids. So we also teach them the why and ask them to reflect on this experience. That closes the experiential learning. And we do that on a daily basis for what we don't know it. All I'm saying is that let's apply it more and more to aspects that relate to our cultural identity. The same way when we were growing up, that was very prevalent. I think we should make sure that this legacy continues.
And your point there about the why goes back to the curiosity aspect that we discussed before. But I mean, I will say, if it's not happening in the classroom, you said these things don't happen in the classroom, they happen elsewhere. But what if they're not happening elsewhere?
I think that's a very valid point, and I think that's a very important point. And one of the courses that was added recently, a few years ago, is a course related to cultural identity, Sana or something. So there is a course that is being taught in schools, at least schools that follow the ministerial curriculum. And I think, for example, private schools in Abu Dhabi last year, there was a mark called National Identity Mark. So they are now also categorizing private schools according to which schools, there's a point system. So I think we're more and more conscious to make sure that educators play a role in that. And I also do think, to be fair to teachers, they do want to teach more about that, but sometimes resources are not available. Yeah. So again, linking resources that are available right here, where we are today, and bridging that gap. So I think sometimes there's a limitation, or not a limitation there. We need to make this smoother, the communication between archivists and teachers. But I'm really keen on the idea that we're all educators. So my co-panelist Abdurrahman earlier, he said he's in a classroom. He teaches tourists about the UAE story. Through my stories, children's books, I teach children about the UAE story. And you teach the world through your scientific work. So I think all of us are contributing in our own way to educating not only youth, but people in general about the Emirati story. So we should all ask ourselves, even in the audience, how is everyone here contributing? I know how Mansour is contributing, but for the others, how are they contributing to the Emirati story?
Absolutely agree. And I think you've raised a really important point around resources and knowledge that educators need within the myriad of schools that we have, not just the ministry schools, but the private schools and the 17 to 20 different curriculums that we have across the UAE. So there's a big task there to do. Abdurrahman, if I could just come to you now, we know that you must meet a variety of people as you navigate and explore the pathways and streets of Abu Dhabi, but also as you retell the stories that reflect our past, as Ahmed just said there. How do you manage any aspects of uncomfortable past so that we can, potentially grapple with any future turbulence? Is there anything there where you struggle to reflect on a past?
Absolutely, yes. I would say this, that unfortunately there's a bit of a pushback against sharing certain aspects of our culture that might be unfavorable, that might be uncomfortable. It might be true to other nations as well, other countries, but it's particularly true here. I tend to not touch on those as much in a public forum, but maybe in a personal space. People that do ask me, how was, the life of your grandpa? And honestly, it wasn't really that beautiful. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of uncomfortable scenarios that he has gone through. So for me, this is an important aspect. But just to elaborate on the idea that, how do we share our stories with foreigners, expats, tourists? And I think the way, from my perspective, is to give them a bit of an authority or for them to take ownership of the perspective that they are part of this country. For instance, one of the things I keep thinking about is, why don't expats, for instance, wear the kandura, you know what I mean, as a formal clothing? And I know there is a lot of cultural pushback against it, and I understand it. But I think if you wear the clothes, if you eat the food, if you cook the food, I can ask the foreigners here, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But have you ever cooked machbous, for instance? Or have you cooked kebab or argag at your homes? I would assume that a lot of them haven't. And these things, for me, when you take ownership, when you are part of the equation, part of the story, then you will be more naturally curious about it.
Thank you so much, Abdurrahman. And you've really taken us into and linked our conversation around heritage, culture, and identity to what the UAE is also known for, the diversity. But you've raised an important point. We're very diverse, but how inclusive are we within that space, and what role do archives play in that? And I'm really curious to understand, how are we disseminating this knowledge to expatriates and the world that is watching from outside? And Ahmed, if I can come to you as an Emirati, when you lived or studied abroad, what were you doing to influence that community that you were in, both as an Emirati, to Emiratis and non-Emiratis, and what can we do more of to open doors and open minds?
So I think this is really, really important. I talked about this often because actually it's one of the things that influenced I'm an engineer by training, so I'm like an accidental author. So I fell into it by accident. I'm still figuring out my way back to engineering. So one of the most influential things that happened was I spent 10 years of my life roughly as a student in the States. And although I didn't realize it at the time, but I still love the US. I spent formative years there, but it's not the US that I love. It's my friends, the lifelong friendships that I've built there, the community I was part of. My American friends and others invited me to their weddings. I went to church with them. I visited their homes for Thanksgiving, all of these things. And again, I didn't realize it at the time, but these are memories that stayed with me to this day. I learned so much. I could tell you a lot about American history and values and ethics, more than maybe the average American. But that's only because they invited me in. They allowed me into their lives. They shared their lives with me. And I think that stayed with me. When I came back to the UAE, I worked at a university, and many of my peers, other faculty, professors, they're not from the UAE. They would tell me that they would love to teach their kids who were born here in the UAE. Keep in mind, this is like maybe 15 years ago. I want to make myself younger. I'm not going to say the exact. But there weren't as many children's books about the UAE, quality books written in English 10, 15 years ago. And my colleagues at work who are foreigners and not necessarily Arab speaking were telling me, like, I want to teach my kid about the UAE. He's living here. He should know about the UAE, but there's nothing out there. And I think that stayed with me and influenced when I first started writing for children about the UAE, but in English. And I think that was my way of inviting them in, sharing the same way I was given that benefit when I lived in the US. So I think all of us in our own circles have a role to play, and not only sharing the gemat during the National Day festivities, right? But every other aspect of our life, sharing, why we do things, the values we carry, how we behave, how we treat people. I think, these small things you might not realize, but these are what adds up to something very, very, I think, monumental. And this is what people take away from the UAE. In my experience, it's not the biggest shopping mall, although those are nice, but it's the interactions, that's the human stories that really last.
Thank you so much for that. Abdurrahman, just coming back to you, what are there any changes that you may have noticed about what tourists are saying about the UAE and maybe their perception of our history and maybe the future of the region?
Well, I haven't been a tour guide for a longer period of time to notice a pattern, but the type of tourists that I get are usually curious about the culture to begin with. So these are people that are, not blinded by stereotypes, people that are not blinded by maybe hateful messaging or whatever, and so they do tell me that their perspective is coming from a curious point of view. I want to explore this culture. I want to understand what the Arabic culture, Emirati Islamic culture is about. But they do tell me that back home, their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, and so on, almost, criticize them for going to such a country, with a different perspective. But when they go back, they explain to them, and some accept it, some don't. So I would say that, unfortunately, it's still there. Might not be with the people coming here, but the pushback against adopting or gaining a new perspective about the UAE is relatively still there.
Thank you so much. And Minazade, you shared with us your story about being a Pakistani living in the West and now the UAE, although you've previously lived in the UAE. What are your thoughts or what thoughts do you have in sharing of knowledge or information from an expat point of view living here?
I think it's incredibly important to share that expat experience, but I also have to confess that I come from a privileged platform of representing a cultural institution in Sharjah, or working with artists, and my work as a curator, as a researcher, is to bring their voices out. One of the things that I love about my co-panelists' work and commitment to it is that very few expats actually get to talk to an Emirati, which is a crazy concept, right? And because I'm in this field where it's really well represented with Emiratis, I am continuously shocked by this. So what you do is counter that. And then I think the cultural institutions where, in a way, this dialogue, this mixing of cultures that then turns into this magic combination that is today's UAE. 10 years from now, the combination of cultures and ethnicities and voices and influences might be different. We just don't know. We're experiencing something very interesting with 500,000 Russians moving here at this moment. It's a huge population. Where will they go from here? It's hard to imagine. So I think continuous dialogue between Emiratis and expats, more and more mechanisms, platforms, institutions that permit this dialogue, and also create what I think is really important is a public space. This is what the Majlis was when the communities were smaller. This is what cultural institutions, institutions of learning, libraries in particular, therefore an archive, these are places where exchange happens. It doesn't, again, just happen in educational institutions. How do we take advantage of these places of contact, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We know that the leaders of this nation, we've heard it this morning as well, and the great emphasis and importance that they place on youth voice. And this will be the last area that we discuss today before we go to any questions. We see that as part of COP28, which is coming up. There's a whole stream around the voice of youth, and they're encouraged to provide solutions to climate change and sustainability. Mehnaz, coming to you first, how do the UAE youth, especially the young UAE creatives, how do they provide a solution maybe and contribute to that narrative around other non-traditional forms of archiving? And I mean, specifically, you've mentioned before around artists, curators, museums. What place does that have?
A huge place, because I think what COP and the enormously vital question around sustainability has allowed for a lot of young creatives in design, in architecture, in artists, in all kinds of media, have been thinking about indigenous practices, local materials, the kind of climate responsive architecture that their grandparents lived in. How do we, as a society, take pride in what was pre-modern maybe, or not part of what is part of the PR packet that tourism industries use, but really the stuff that practices, not stuff, practices that are about living in a world that is thoughtful and ethical and sustainable. All of these practices were there. Yes, your grandfather's generation may have not had the wealth that everybody thinks, but there were practices that we today need to be reminded of. And children who think that everybody's always lived in 17-degree air conditioning, had water just running freely, and anything is possible because they can arrive in a plane by Amazon in 5 minutes. This is not the reality. And some of these practices we might have to break if we're thinking about a sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Mehnaz. Ahmed, you mentioned a point earlier on around archives and their restriction, you know, that they can be quite restrictive. And I'm wondering what the role of technology is maybe to make them appealing to the youth.
Yeah, so again, traditionally archives were more, the difference between, in my view, between an archive and a library, like archives are more protected, library could walk in and check out a book. The reason being at that time, traditionally, primary sources need to be protected so they're not tampered with, right? But now with technology, you can give access while also protecting these primary sources. Many different ways of doing that to ensure that the primary source remains intact. I think the next step from here is how to use technology. The previous panel used CGI in a film to bring the past alive. And I think for me, at least, it was very emotional to see and hear and try to imagine the lives that our ancestors lived here in this part of the world. I think primary sources are always going to be primary sources, but we need to, I think artists and youth can utilize them as inspiration for, you know, music and children's works and literature and art in general, right? And I think art at its core tells a story and it evokes a reaction from someone. The story of the UAE is one that is begging to be told. And I think we're doing much better now than we used to in telling that story and adding more layers to it, and in many different formats, like I said, film and music and poetry and all these things. So I actually, the leaders of this country placed a lot of trust in youth for a good reason. Yeah. I think we sometimes take things for granted. Youth can be very, I think, responsible individuals. You know, youth are not students. They're also consumers and producers and have a lot of commercial power and disposable income. So when we look at youth, let's look at them not as one thing and their limitations, but as everything else they represent and how they contribute to the society. And if you think about it, they're actually contributing in so many different ways, because one person can be so many things. So I think letting them interact with and have access to primary sources, archives, and letting them create whatever it is they're passionate about. In one of my school visits, just as a brief story, I was talking to one of the parents after the session. She was moved by the story and all of that. And she was telling me, we have to have more Emirati stories in the libraries and all of that. And then I asked her, you know, if your daughter wants to become an illustrator, like for a living, would you allow? This was a few years ago. She's like, of course not. So like, but then how do you expect the Emirati story to be told if all of us are supposed to be engineers or doctors or lawyers? The story needs to be told by Emiratis as well as residents, but we should be open about letting youth express their creativity in their own way and not being restrictive. And I think this is so important because today, you know, telling the Emirati story, we need so many creatives and different art forms. So let's also remember to give them the space to pursue their passion.
Totally agree with you. Not to restrict them and let them create, which is what they do on social media, don't they, Abdulrahman? Coming to you, can you share your final thoughts around social media? Now, you must see so many different platforms take on the role of the tour guide as well, right? And that narrative. What opportunities or challenges do you see when it comes to social media and youth?
Well, I'm glad I'm asked this question. I personally don't utilize a lot of social media platforms. I'm limited to a couple, but I know that the eyes currently are on TikTok, are on, Snapchat. If I ask the audience who's on Snapchat, probably all of them, right? Who are you dedicating your time to, your free time to? It's that person or group of people or whatever that you watch. They have influence on your life inadvertently more than you think. They have influence on how much knowledge you have on a specific subject and so on and so forth. And just to build on that, I personally don't follow a lot of niche Emirati Snapchat, creators. But it turns out that my mom does, right? And so I went ahead and asked her, what do you see on there? And it turns out there's a lot of Emirati older people that have documented Majlis sessions, and they have people that are watching. Most likely all of them are Emirati youth that are interested, and they gather this information from this specific platform. And so, does social media have a lot of superficial stuff? Yes. But does it also have things that will give value, that will document the history, that will inspire people to do something and to share the culture? I think yes, as well.
Thank you so much. We'll come to just a couple of questions in the audience if there are any. And meanwhile, can I ask my panelists to think of one final call for action as our audience leave today to say for your final words. But are there any questions before we do that? One from Isabel at the front.
First of all, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists and Sanam as well for a wonderful job of moderating. My question is enlightenment by information. How can we ensure that the youth particularly are enlightened by true information? So this is the biggest issue I feel that the world is facing at the moment is incorrect information via so many social media panels, areas. But ChatGPT, which is the big thing, so I've got I've signed up for it and I'm using it. I have yet to find one single answer from it that is correct about the United Arab Emirates. So until we are able to populate the Wikipedias, the Googles, and the ChatGPT with correct information about our country, we are going to be always misunderstood. So I want to say to our panelists, how are we going to do that, please?
Mehnazia, thank you as well.
I think a lot about this. This is something that we all need to take responsibility for in this country in particular, because while we are asking for everybody to participate, have voice, and add to the narrative, we cannot at the same time talk about some higher power that says, nope, that's not knowledge. Nope, that's not information, either because it's the wrong kind of form or it's the wrong kind of opinion, not the kind of story the nation wants out about it. But these are ethical questions that we need to process. If this is going to be a national archive that opens itself up to all kinds of viewpoints about the national narrative, is it something that only nationals participate in, or do expats after more than 2 years? I'm kidding. But like, when is somebody allowed to talk about the UAE? And this might get difficult. This false information circulating as real information still requires monitoring, right? Somebody on those sites has to be flagging it. But how does a national archive handle this? This is, at this moment, this has to be considered.
Thank you, Mehnaz. Ahmed Abdurrahman, did you want to comment? Abdurrahman first.
Well, if this shows me anything, it shows me the limitations of ChatGPT, to be honest with you. While it does give you information and it's convenient, and I have used it, I'll confess to that. I don't think you should particularly use it to inform yourself about a specific subject to a certain extent. Yes, you can get the headlines, but then you got to investigate. So this actually says more about who's using the tool than what the tool provides, frankly. And I think, yeah, the emphasis on the National Archive, or for instance, as a tour guide from DCT, the reason that they certify tour guides is to make sure that what I'm saying is at least closer to the truth than anything else. So maybe in the future, we'll have a ChatGPT certified by DCT, who knows?
Thank you, Abdurrahman. And Ahmed, your final words.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a very educator perspective, which is different than my co-panelists. I actually think ChatGPT is great. It's great for getting information, but what we should be focusing on as educators, I think, and parents and whoever's using this is, I think the way we educate should be different. Knowledge is now available. Now, knowledge could be factual or fictional. So what we should be teaching our children is not just the information, but critical thinking skills, learning how to learn. That is now today more of, I understand at one point in time, maybe 2, 3, 4 generations ago, but children needed to be taught how the multiplication tables. Remember those? 4 times 4, 16. Okay. Do we need to teach this to kids today? I'll get into a lot of trouble. I'm an engineer if I say no. But I think what we should be teaching them even more today than before, because this is easy now. A simple calculator, not even ChatGPT, can give you the answer, is what to do with this information. Does this sound right or wrong? Right? Critical thinking skills, ability to, and then at the same time, as educators, we need to change our assessment methods, our evaluation methods. So instead of asking a student to hand in a paper that ChatGPT can produce in 5 minutes, I'm going to ask the student to explain to his peers in the classroom, what did you actually learn about this topic? And let's have a dialogue. So our assessment methods also should change to match the new reality. This is the reality. This is not fictitious. ChatGPT is a fact. It's out there. We will use it. Everybody uses it. So I think we need to adapt to that. I'll also say that there is a version of, it's not ChatGPT, but there's one called the Falcon, produced by a technology research center here in the UAE. So maybe the National Archives can collaborate with them to have content there as well. Not a plugin, I don't work there, but I'm very proud that something like that has been produced here in the UAE.
A good pitch at the end. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to come to you for final words for our audience, and then we'll wrap up for this afternoon.
Yeah.
Did we have
I have a question.
One more question. I
Yeah.
do apologize, please.
I'm Romana here, and I'm an educationalist. And in the capacity of moral education, moral, social, and cultural studies program running at schools. So I'm representing a school from Dubai. Now, my question to Dr. Ahmed is, we do teach them theory. That is what the history is all about through this program. But my students definitely ask this question, how are we adding to this narrative? Because most of the units that's covered in the curriculum does give theoretical facts and so on, but the interactive side is not shown. For example, there was an activity wherein, the students had to collect the objects which represents Emirati culture or something to do with Emirati culture from their homes and bring it as an exhibition and later go to the museum. but my students could not collect any object which is related to Emirati culture because they are expats. Now, the second question was, where do we go in for? How much are we using products from Emirati culture in our household? So there was a lot of, if at all I have to say, there are challenges where we have to rationalize to our students, why are we studying Emirati culture? So point one, my question is, how is National Library and Archives helping the teaching fraternity to build this program in the system itself, integrate it in the lives? The second part is, I do see the effort of MOE to extend the understanding and the national capacity building program and so on. However, how is it seeped into the mainstream curriculum? Because the MSc as a subject is a supplementary program running in schools. But in the mainstream curriculum, we rarely come across any example in the textbooks referring to Emirati culture, any research happening, and so on and so forth. Even at the DP level, that is grade 11 and 12, I teach the IBDP program. The cultural anthropology is a subject that we've introduced, but we are not researching on Emirati culture. Rather, we are going outside to do our research. So very rarely students, even if they want to research about the Emirati culture, especially the expats, they do not know which platform to address, where to go. So Dr. Ahmed, over to you. I know it was a lengthy question, but
Thanks
yes.
for the question. I will get to Ahmed to answer that as succinctly as
Thank
he
you.
can.
Thank you for the question. So I can't speak to the organizations and entities that you talked about, but I can tell you there's actually a lot of resources out there. Like I said earlier, my one of the answers I gave is the connecting between these things. So again, not a pitch, but for example, in February, the Emirates Literature Festival always happens. There's always a lot of activities and authors from the UAE targeting different age groups. I've been invited there. Many of my friends, authors are there, and they give there's a lot of books and materials and things like that. And there are others that are happening. That's just one example. I think 2 weekends ago, I was in Al Ain. I went to the Sheikh Zayed Palace, which is now open as a museum, and you can, there are tour guides and so on. Now, what I think you're saying specifically, because it sounds like you're working in a school that has mostly expats. There are other mechanisms, like, for example, I know that there are elderly Emiratis that are sitting at home bored now. How can we make the connection? How can we include? There are Emiratis that are in hospitals, right? How can we arrange for some of these children to visit, to interact, to give access? So there are actually many ideas out there. It's just, like I said, we're making the connections. I worked in ADNOC for a while. Many of the people that I worked with and looked up to are now retired. They know so much about this country. They know so much about the UAE. And they're very passionate. They're still very healthy, although they're retired. How can we engage that section of the community? I don't have answers to all of these questions, but I know that the information, the experts are out there. We just need to make the connections.
Connections is the way to go, and building that, and of course sharing best practice between the schools and the organizations as well. So well-managed archives and records are the means by which our nations can understand the who, the when, the where, the how, and the why of our actions to help our future decisions. May we continue to be successful in this journey, and may we benefit from this knowledge that would lead us to further enlightenment and having the courage to use our own understanding. Final words before we go. One sentence. Yeah, please do.
One sentence. It's going to be challenging. For the Emiratis, because at the end of the day, we're transmitting this culture to the people around us. Just be curious about your own history and be proud of it. Your own specific tribal history. Tell it to the people, tell it to your friends. And that's where everything starts. From there, you can have so many different conversations.
Thank you so much. Mehnaz?
I think I'll just echo that. It's take ownership of your history, the information that you can access so that you can tell your own story.
Thank you. And Ahmed.
The same point I just made. I think collaboration and partnership between the different cultural organizations, educators, archivists working together to fill in the gaps as outlined by one of our guests here or the audience as a teacher. I think we should help them by providing resources through collaboration.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the National Library and Archives and the Emirates Literature Foundation for hosting and programming the first event shaping the Arab world as part of the Knowledge Circle cultural events taking place from now until the end of March. And specifically, once again, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for your contributions, your insights, and your final words of wisdom there. And thank you to the audience. Have a safe and blessed journey. Ma salama.